Love in Return by Jacqueline Hardy. Chapter 1. The fall wind whipped Kayla's hair around her face as she rushed out to the car. It took longer to get out of the house than she'd wanted, and they were going to be late for Thanksgiving dinner, all buckled in. She glanced in the rearview mirror at the three excited faces staring back at her. Yes. But I have to go potty. Evie struggled to get out of her car seat. Kayla closed her eyes and took a deep breath to stay calm. Dinner would still be there even if they arrived late. Come on. Ethan rolled his eyes and helped Evie out of her seat. She does this every time. Yes, I know. Watch your brother. I'll hurry. Kayla braced herself for the wind and opened the door to run into the house. While Evie was in the bathroom, Kayla checked and rechecked to make sure the oven was off and nothing was plugged in that shouldn't be. The thought of staying home went through her mind yet again, but she pushed it away. It was a tradition that her kids would never let her break. Ready, Evie? When she didn't answer, Kayla poked her head into the bathroom, but it was empty. Evie? Noise came from upstairs. Of course. She would want to take more stuffed animals to her grandparents' house. Evie held a doll in her arms as she stared up at the picture on the dresser. Daddy. Daddy's not coming this time. You know that, sweetie. Kayla scooped Evie up in her arms and went downstairs. Now, stay right here while I lock the door. Got it? Got it. Kayla locked the deadbolt and made sure the alarm was set before running to the car. Ethan and Noah were giggling about something when Kayla opened the door to put Evie in her chair. What are you two up to? Your hair is all over the place. Ethan reached over and pulled a strand away from Kayla's face. Kayla kissed his forehead and climbed into the front seat. That's what happens when you have long hair in wind like this. The trip from their home in the Bronx to her parents' home in Plymouth, Massachusetts, would take 3.5 hours, and she was eager to get out of there before traffic got worse. She knew she should have left a day earlier, but Ethan had school. Mommy, where's Ginger? Noah asked. In her box, remember? Ginger gave a sharp bark at the mention of her name, causing another fit of giggles from the kids. Kayla backed out and headed for the highway. She turned on some music for the kids and allowed her mind to drift as she made the familiar trip back to her childhood home. By the time Kayla finally turned into the driveway, the kids had fallen asleep, and Ginger whimpered in the back. Kayla let the dog out first and then woke up Ethan and the others. Wake up, sleepyheads. Ethan unbuckled and hopped out and ran after Ginger, while Noah and Evie looked around, trying to get their bearings. We're at Grandma's. Hurry, we can get our bags later. They're probably sitting down to dinner right now. Kayla picked up Evie and followed the others into the house. She could already hear the excited voices as the door was thrown open to welcome Ethan and Ginger. Kayla couldn't help smiling as she walked up the steps and into her mom's arms. So sorry we're late. The turkey took a little longer than usual, so we were just getting the table set as you pulled up. Come on in. Her mom had aged beautifully with her long silver hair in a bun at the nape of her neck. Evie struggled to get down, so Kayla let her go find her cousins before taking off her own coat and shoes. The aroma of turkey and other delicious smells drifted down the hallway. It smells amazing, Mom. Kayla walked into the kitchen behind her mom, and several chairs scraped as her family scrambled over to give her a hug. Hey, sorry I'm late. Kayla's brother, Josh, nearly knocked her over as he wrapped her in a bear hug. Hey, sis. I haven't seen you in way too long. Hey, it's not my fault you took off for school across the country. Kayla laughed and hugged him back. It's so good to see you. Josh pulled away. Where's Ethan? He's got to be so big by now. He is. He just turned 8. Noah misses him while he's at school all day, but at least he can play with Evie when he's not at preschool. Kayla glanced into the living room. I'm not sure where they are. Probably off with their cousins somewhere. Awesome. Oh, hey, Josh turned and gestured to a guy who stood in the back of the crowd talking to their sister, Charlotte. This is Andrew. He was my roommate during my freshman year at Stanford, and get this, he moved to New York last year and started work at Silver Script. I had no idea he was there until I had the job. Small world, isn't it? Yep. Small world. Kayla smiled at Andrew. You're brave for walking into this chaos. Andrew laughed, and the richness of it soothed her nerves. Josh didn't give me much choice when I told him that I didn't really celebrate Thanksgiving. Oh, I'm sure that didn't go over well. You don't get away with saying something like that in front of my family. Kayla backed up against the wall so her mom could pass by with a steaming bowl of gravy. Excuse me. I'm going to go help my mom. It's nice to meet you. Kayla escaped into the kitchen. Something about Andrew unnerved her, but not in a bad way. His hair had flecks of silver throughout, but his gray eyes and grin made him appear young. And his laugh. She shook her head and grabbed a bowl of stuffing to take out to the table. There you are. I was afraid you were going to miss dinner this year. Her dad's booming voice came from behind her, Daddy. She set down the bowl and threw her arms around him. How are you feeling? How's your hip? He chuckled. I'm fine. The doctor says I'm healing much faster than expected. That's great. Not surprising. You always were stubborn. Kayla hugged him again. He'd had surgery, and seemed determined to heal quickly enough that he could get back to work soon. He owned a construction business and hated to be away for too long, and I'm proud to say I passed that gene on to my kids. How's your business doing? Still finding new clients? Kayla smiled at the mention of her accounting business she'd worked hard to build up. It's going great. I think tax season will be busy, but that's a good thing. That's my girl. He kissed her on the forehead and put his arm around her as they walked back to the dining room. Kayla had to maneuver around everyone to set the bowl on the table. The kids ate at the table in the living room while the parents were in the dining room. Her brother and sisters sat with their spouses, leaving her a spot directly across from Andrew. She sighed in relief. At least they weren't trying to play matchmaker this time. They'd learned from the last mess when her sister Erica had tried to bring a guy home for Kayla. He'd taken over the conversation and stormed out when Kayla shut him down over a political argument. Her mother sat at the table next to her dad and smiled at everyone. Look at us. Finally all together again. Thanks for coming, everyone. It means a lot that you're here. Even if some of you have a hard time celebrating my favorite holiday. Dad's glance toward Kayla was quick, but it was enough to make Andrew glance between the two of them. Dad took Mom's hand on one side and Erica's on the other. Let's give a prayer of thanks. Kayla's cheeks burned as she closed her eyes to pray. Why did her dad have to say that? It wasn't as though she didn't like the holiday. It meant a lot to her family. It just brought back bitter memories of a few years before the prayer ended, and everyone dished out the potatoes, gravy, vegetables, and turkey and then passed the serving dishes on to the next person. Kayla was grateful for the distraction and hoped Andrew would forget what had been said. So, Josh, you haven't told us much about your job. Are you enjoying it? Mom asked. Oh, man, it's great. Never thought I'd be working at an advertising agency in New York City, but I couldn't be happier. He took a second roll and pulled it apart to add honey butter. It helps that you had an in with one of the agents who was already there. Erica smirked and glanced over at Andrew. Right? Andrew laughed. Hey, it was all him. I had nothing to do with it. It was a shock to see him there on his first day. From what I hear, Silver Script never knew what hit them when they saw his portfolio. Well, whatever happened, we're just glad he was able to move closer to home. I'm still holding out for him to decide he really does want to do construction so he can take over for me when I finally retire. Dad grinned and took a bite of turkey. Kayla watched the exchange with amusement. Dad hadn't been thrilled when Josh decided to go into something other than construction, especially when it took him all the way to Stanford. It had caused a strain between them for the first year or two, but when Erica's husband stepped in, Dad had lightened up on Josh. Mom leaned forward. So, Andrew, did Josh tell you why Thanksgiving is such a big deal to us? The entire family groaned. This happened every time a new person came to dinner. By now, they all had the conversation memorized. Andrew paused. I assumed it was for the turkey and pie. Oh, that's part of it, of course. But we have a bigger reason. You see, our ancestor was the one who started Thanksgiving. I thought that was the Pilgrims. Andrew glanced over at Kayla, and she shot him a sympathetic smile. Mom laughed. Well, yes. But it was only celebrated by a few people until our ancestor Sarah Josepha Hale wrote to the President of the United States regularly for 20 years. 20. Can you believe that? But why? That's a long time to be writing for a simple holiday. To give thanks for everything we have. To remember our blessings in the fall when we have received the bounty of the harvest. To bring families together. All of these reasons made it worth those 20 years for her. The pride was evident on her face as she talked about her ancestor. Andrew nodded. That's great. She sounds like an amazing woman. She was. She wrote for several magazines over the years and raised her family alone after her husband died of a stroke. We thought our dear Kayla would follow in her footsteps with her journalism degree, but after, Mom took a deep breath and smiled. Kayla decided to go into accounting. Now she's blazing trails of her own. More mashed potatoes. A silence had fallen over the table, and the sudden change of subject only seemed to accent it. Kayla took the potatoes from her mom and dished more onto her plate, even though her appetite was long gone. She should have known the light-hearted feeling wouldn't last. Andrew obviously knew something was up by the way he glanced between Josh, Kayla, and her mom, but he didn't say anything. After a few minutes of polite conversation, Kayla couldn't take it and pushed away from the table. Twice now, her divorce had nearly been brought up, and they weren't even to dessert yet. I'm going to go see what the kids are up to. Dinner was wonderful, Mom. As always. She left before anyone could say anything and went into the living room. The cousins chattered together, and food still sat on their plates. Typical. They were having too much fun talking. Mommy. Look. Evie grabbed a handful of mashed potatoes and shoved them into her mouth, causing giggles from the others. Kayla sighed and took a few napkins before kneeling down next to Evie. Let's eat our food instead of playing in it. Evie's deep blue eyes stared up at her. I made a mess. Yes, mess. She turned to find Ethan shoveling food in his mouth. Hey, slow down. I know Grandma's food is good, but it's better not to choke on it. Ethan nodded and set his fork down. The others had started eating as well. Maybe leaving them all without adult supervision hadn't been such a good idea. Kayla put a chair between Ethan and Evie. The first of the cousins stood with his empty plate and took it into the kitchen, and others followed. It wasn't long before it was just her children sitting there. Ethan stared at his plate in silence. Go. I'll finish your turkey. Kayla slid the plate over in front of her as Ethan grinned and hopped up to catch the others. She took the plate Noah held out to her and laughed. Yes, you can go too. Thanks, Mommy. Noah let out a whoop and took off down the hall. Kayla looked over at Evie. Are you going to leave me too? Evie grinned, her mouth full of food. I stay. Oh, good. I didn't want to be all by myself. She split apart the roll Noah had left and slathered it with honey butter. Want some? Evie handed her the bread on her plate. Some. Please. Her sister appeared. So, you finally admitted you really belong at the kids' table, I see. Much easier this way. Kayla smiled weakly. Charlotte sat down next to her and stole a carrot off her plate. Mom didn't mean to bring it up. I know. One of these days, you need to get back out there again. Kayla wiped Evie's face before answering. I know. I'm not ready. Did you hear he's marrying her? Yeah. I'd hoped you hadn't heard. Charlotte leaned her head against her sister's shoulder. You're better off without him. I know, but it doesn't make it easier. Kayla heard chairs scooting out in the dining room and knew the adults were beginning to clean up. Let's go. I want to get to the pumpkin pie before everyone else. She helped Evie down and took her into the bathroom to wash her hands and face, then went to clean off the tables. Erica had already started on the kids' table, so Kayla picked up the dish of potatoes and headed for the kitchen. She looked up just as someone came around the corner of the living room and ran right into her. The dish went clattering to the floor, sending mashed potatoes in several directions. I'm so sorry. I was just coming to find you. Andrew knelt next to her to help scoop up the food. He met her eyes, and she was struck by the electricity that seemed to shoot between them. I should have watched where I was going. She picked up the pot just as he reached for it, their hands touching. She jerked back. Sorry. I can take it. Nah, I got it. His rich voice washed over her as he stood. Kayla stared at her potato-covered hands, still feeling the touch of his fingers on hers. She shook her head and went to the kitchen to wash it all off. Andrew stood there laughing with her mom. If you didn't like the food, you could have just told me. Mom smiled. Well, this was much more efficient. Kayla took the towel from her. I'll mop up the rest. Erica came into the kitchen and glanced down at the mess with an eyebrow raised. What happened here? Mashed potato fight. Kayla grinned. After wetting the towel in the sink, she squeezed it out and knelt to mop up the leftovers off the floor. Andrew bent down next to her and started on the walls with a wet paper towel. You don't have to do that. You're going to miss out on pie, she told him. I'm the one who ran into you. This way, we get done faster, and then we can have all the pie we want. He met her eyes, a smile playing on his lips. Kayla looked away, trying to squash the butterflies that had erupted in her stomach. Why did he have to do that to her? Thanks. I recommend the cherry pie. It's amazing. That's your favorite? No, the pumpkin is. But if I recommend that one, it means one less piece for me. Kayla did her best to keep a straight face as she picked up the last of the mess. Andrew stared at her for a moment before laughing. Fair enough. I won't come between you and your pumpkin pie. I like cherry better anyway. Good answer. She laughed and stood to wash out the cloth, and noticed all the pies arranged on the counter. Once all of the kids were served, Kayla took her plate into the living room and sat next to Evie. It was a little squished with 7 kids, but she wasn't about to let Evie throw her pie across the table. The wind whipped Kayla's scarf as she made her way out to the beach with her family, Ginger yapping happily at her heels as she walked. Her dad stayed to babysit the kids, which she suspected was his favorite part of the Thanksgiving visit. Normally she walked barefoot, but the temperature was cooler than usual and she didn't want her feet to freeze. As they reached the Plymouth Rock Monument, her sisters and their spouses separated from the group. They'd heard the stories often enough that they didn't stick around. For Kayla, it was part of what Thanksgiving meant for her family, so she loved hearing it all over again. Other families wandered the park on their after-dinner walks as well. Mom put her arm around Kayla's waist and leaned in to whisper. I'm so glad you came, sweetie. I wouldn't miss it. You know that. Kayla's mind flashed back to 3 years before when her ex-husband, Mike, stood at this very spot, telling her he'd met someone else and would be moving out before Christmas. Evie was only a few months old at the time, I know, but, Mom, not now, Kay? Let's talk about the Pilgrims. That's why we're here. Kayla had tried to keep her voice down, but she looked over to see Andrew and Josh staring at her. Josh cleared his throat. I'll do it this year. I missed it the last 2 years. Andrew glanced between all of them. Do what? We rehash the history of Plymouth Rock every year. It's part of remembering Sarah. Kayla smiled at her mom to let her know she wasn't angry. She stroked behind Ginger's ears. Great. I mean, I know what I learned in history class, but a refresher course is always a good thing. Josh grinned. Okay, but we'll just do the crash course this time. I'm freezing. They walked through the memorial and went over the plaques inside before they moved along to the other plaques throughout the park. Kayla couldn't help watching Andrew as he soaked in the story that Josh brought to life. He actually seemed to care about what was being said instead of glancing at his watch like Mike had done so many times before. As soon as the short tour ended, Josh shivered. I'm heading inside for some hot chocolate. Are you coming? Andrew nodded and followed Josh and her mom inside while Kayla hung back. She wanted a few more moments of quiet before putting her kids in bed. Ginger chased the waves in and out with the tide as Kayla found a bench and stared out at the ocean. She enjoyed the channel through New York City and headed out to Staten Island with the kids every so often, but there was nothing like this beach, her beach, to calm her nerves. Can I sit here? Andrew's voice made Kayla jump. She nodded. I thought you went in with Josh. Well, I was going to, but I didn't want you to sit out here by yourself. But if you want, I can go. You can stay. I won't be here much longer anyway. I can handle the cold for a little longer than my brother who spent time in California, but it's starting to get to me. Andrew smiled. I have to admit, I'm freezing. We should go in, then. No reason for you to be miserable. Who said anything about being miserable? He grinned. Normally when someone said something even remotely cheesy, Kayla would roll her eyes. This time, however, her stomach fluttered, and she couldn't help smiling. So, you know way more about me and my family than I care to share most of the time. What about you? Where are you from? Andrew leaned back and draped his arm over the back of the bench, his fingers nearly brushing her arm. I'm from Colorado originally, but we moved all over for my dad's work. My parents are in South Carolina now, and my younger sister, Haley, is in California. She followed me to college, but hasn't graduated yet. My older sister, Val, is married and has a few kids, but I rarely see her. And that's me in a nutshell. Wow. That's amazing. I made it as far as 3 hours away from my hometown. Kayla smiled. Yes, but I think it's cool. It was hard moving around as I grew up. Making friends was pointless because I knew we'd leave by the end of the school year. Kayla grimaced. Wow. That sounds awful. I mean, I know some people prefer moving around, but it's just not what I'd want. As evidenced by your strong interest in your family history. Andrew hesitated. Sorry. I didn't mean to sound rude. That wasn't rude. Mom is a little more excited about our ancestry than most. She sighed. I guess I'd better go in. I hate to think of what Evie has done to the house by now. Andrew stood and held out a hand. I was hoping you'd say that. My feet are numb. Kayla took it, letting go as she started walking toward the house. You'd think coming from Colorado would have you used to the cold. I left when I was 5. Not sure that was enough exposure. Andrew blew on his hands to warm them while they waited for Ginger to meet up with them. Shall we race? Kayla looked up at him in surprise before grinning. Sure. On your mark, get set, go. She took off running, laughing as she heard him yell behind her. She made it back to the front porch and bent over to catch her breath. She loved running, but the cold wind froze her lungs. Andrew came up a few seconds later, holding his side and breathing heavily. You totally cheated. No, I just figured it was ladies first. Come on. Mom probably has hot chocolate all ready for us. Or some pie. I'll take either. Warmth washed over them as they walked inside. The kids were off in a different part of the house, yelling as their grandpa roared like a bear. It was his favorite game to play, and apparently even a bad hip wasn't enough to stop him from chasing them around the room. Andrew glanced over at Kayla, his eyebrows raised. Don't mind him. He's harmless. Kayla took off her coat and scarf and hung them on the rack next to the door, then let Ginger out into the backyard. Mom was in the kitchen putting together trays of rolls and leftovers from lunch. Ah, there you are. Your dad and brother are already starving again, so I figured we'd eat soon. Sounds about right. I'll go gather up the kids. Kayla followed the noise down the hall to the TV room and found her dad on the floor wrestling. I'm not sure that's how you behave after surgery. They started it. He rolled over and paused to catch his breath before pushing himself up to standing. How was the walk? Kayla picked up Evie. Same as every year. The ocean was choppy, the wind was cold, and I loved every second of it. And the company? Dad. She shook her head. Unbelievable. Did Mom do this? He lifted his hands in surrender. Hey, this time it wasn't even on purpose. But you have to admit, he's a great guy. How long have you known him? Kayla raised an eyebrow. Since yesterday. But that's long enough. Come on, I'm starving. He limped toward the kitchen. Evie struggled, so Kayla set her down and they went to find the rest of the family. Mom had already served the kids, and the adults were in line for food when Kayla took her plate and stood behind Charlotte. When do you head back? Kayla took some turkey and a couple of rolls. Charlotte popped an olive into her mouth. I have an appointment on Monday, so we'll probably head back Sunday. What about you? Taking off first thing in the morning? And fight Black Friday traffic? No, thank you. Kayla spread some mustard on her roll. I think we'll probably go back Saturday. Ethan's begging to play with friends, and I have some work I need to get done. How long is Josh staying? Charlotte whispered. Kayla shrugged. I figured they'd go back tonight. It'll be too late tonight. Mom already insisted on having them sleep in Josh's room. So why'd you ask me when he's leaving? Kayla took a glass of water off the counter. Charlotte glanced over at him. Because Andrew's gorgeous and obviously likes you. Kayla didn't say anything as they went to sit down. It probably helped that she was the only single person over the age of 10 here. Of course he would pay attention to her. Dad spent the time telling funny things the kids had said and rehashing the football game he'd been watching. As they continued talking, Kayla took her empty plate to the kitchen to start washing dishes. They'd need more forks for dessert later, and she didn't want her mom to have to worry about it. As she walked back into the dining room to clear off the table, she stopped short. Mike was holding Ethan out as far as he could, and his face was totally green as he tried not to smell the diaper. It was hilarious. Josh's laugh rang through the air. Who's Mike? Andrew asked. Mom looked up, her eyes wide when she saw Kayla standing there. Feeling her face burn, Kayla said, Hey, I'm going to get the bags while there's a little less chaos. She grabbed her coat and walked blindly out to the car as tears threatened to spill. It took a few tries to get the back hatch open, and she growled in frustration. Why did Josh have to bring that up in front of Andrew? Or at all? Mike wasn't even part of this family anymore. Chapter 2. Andrew saw the shock and hurt on Kayla's face as she came around the corner. When she left, he nearly jumped out of his chair to go comfort her. even though he didn't know what the problem was. But it wasn't his place to pry. She would talk about it when she was ready. The family glared at Josh before changing the subject to the next day's Black Friday sales. Josh cleared his throat, stood, and took his plate to the kitchen, and Andrew quickly followed. The atmosphere was still strained at the table, and he needed to escape while he could. Josh went to the front door and pulled on his coat. "I'm such a jerk." "We already knew that." Andrew grabbed his coat as well, and they ran out to Kayla's car. It was obvious she'd been crying by the redness of her eyes, but she didn't say anything as they took her bags from her. "Can you take these up to the house? I need to talk to her for a sec." Josh handed Andrew the other bags and turned back to his sister. Andrew took the luggage inside, thankful that most of them were small. After struggling to find the knob, he managed to get the door open. Josh's mom met him there with the same sadness that he saw on Josh's face. "Where do these go?" he asked. "I'll show you where they're staying." She led him down the hall just past Josh's old room and into what was most likely Kayla's old room. The walls were a light purple and covered in newspaper clippings, posters of old boy bands, and several framed awards. "Just set those on the bed, and she'll put them where she wants them." "Okay." Andrew set them down and glanced at the awards for various writing contests. If she'd loved it that much, why had she given it up? Charlotte passed him in the hall with two of her kids in tow. "Night, Andrew. I think Josh and Kayla are in the kitchen." "Thanks." Andrew narrowly avoided being hit by Kayla's son as he ran past. This was completely different from what he grew up with, but instead of feeling awkward, it seemed right. Like he'd been missing it his whole life. He brushed off the thought and went to Josh's room to change, then pumped up the air mattress. Silver Script had insisted that their agents take the next day off, and he was looking forward to another day to relax. He'd worked several contracts lately and needed the break before the Christmas rush. While ads were filmed way in advance, they still had to make sure everything was done correctly with airing the commercials that were filmed. Josh and Kayla spoke quietly at the kitchen counter and stopped when Andrew walked in. Andrew pulled a glass out of the cupboard to get a drink of water. "Your stuff is in your room." Kayla pushed out the stool and stretched. "Thank you. I'd better get the kids to bed." "Night." "Good night." Andrew watched her go, then turned to Josh. "Is she okay?" "Yeah, I'm just an idiot." Josh set his mug in the sink. "I'm going to bed too." "Are you staying up to watch the Black Friday stats?" Andrew laughed. "No, I'll check them in the morning. My clients were smart and waited until 6 a.m. instead of midnight to open." "Nice. I'm going to have to make that a policy. Don't take any clients who open Thanksgiving night." "Good luck with that. Besides, it's not too bad. We have the software to take care of it. We just need to collect the data and pass it on. Meanwhile, I'll hide out here." It was nearly 4 a.m. on Friday morning before Andrew finally gave up on trying to sleep. He wasn't used to the sounds of kids crying out or other people walking to the bathroom during the night. Josh snored softly and Andrew didn't want to wake him, so he grabbed his laptop and tiptoed out to the dining room table. The Wi-Fi was much faster at this time in the morning, which made it nice to get his work done. Even though he'd told Josh he would wait until later, he couldn't help checking stats. Most sales weren't set to start for another hour or two, but his clients' tablets had already sold out in several locations. He was thrilled that they'd agreed to drop prices at some of the bigger retailers, and he hoped they'd be as pleased with the numbers. "What are you doing up?" Kayla stood in the entrance to the dining room. Her eyes looked tired, but she was still beautiful in the maroon cable knit sweater she wore. She held her coat in her arms, watching sales. "What are you doing up?" She blushed and glanced behind her. "Black Friday shopping. Charlotte and I have gone for years, even though my mom tried to drill the whole Thanksgiving is not about shopping thing into our minds. I'm sure we'll hear about it again tonight. Anyway, I was going to skip it this year, but I couldn't sleep. Besides, it's the best way to shop for my kids' Christmas gifts. I stay away from shopping because I'm afraid I'll have my arm ripped off or get trampled. I prefer to stay on this end of the sales. He gestured toward his laptop. Want to see? Kayla smiled and came over to sit next to him, her arm brushing up against his. The perfume she wore was intoxicating. She leaned forward, staring at the screen. Okay, so what is this for? This graph shows regular sales for a product, and I created this one to show the sales for today. It helps me see what worked and what didn't for advertising so we can be ready for next year. You made this? She leaned forward, her shoulder brushing his. He smiled and typed in a code, thrilled that she was so into his work. There are other options, but I wanted it more specific so I did it myself, and then Josh tweaked a few things to make it even better. That's amazing. She stood and sighed. Charlotte must not be coming this time. I'd better get going so I can grab Evie's toy before someone else does. You're going alone? He asked, alarmed. Visions of the brawls he'd seen played in his mind. Isn't that dangerous? People have died by getting trampled. She laughed. Don't trust everything the news tells you. They find the most ridiculous fights to broadcast and fail to show the communities where people don't fight over dolls or big screen TVs. Aha! I'll take your word for it. He turned back to his laptop. I'll let your family know where you are when they wake up. Kayla paused by the door. Come with me. What? No, I mean it. Come on. I want to prove that it's safe. She held out her hand. Andrew stared at her for a moment before closing his laptop. A shopping trip with one of the most beautiful, intriguing women he'd ever met? He'd be a fool to miss out on this chance. Fine, but if I get trampled, you have to visit me in the hospital. Deal. I'll go warm up my car and meet you out there. She grinned and headed for the front door. After changing into jeans and a button-down shirt, he put on his boots and jacket and left the house. He climbed into the passenger seat and buckled his seatbelt. Okay, so where do we go first? The mall. They have my favorite stores. Then we'll move out to the chains and go through what's left over from all the craziness. Kayla pulled out of the driveway and steered toward the main part of town. Shoppers were out in droves, carrying packages and laughing together. Kayla stopped as a few groups crossed the street, then turned into a parking spot. Andrew climbed out and stared up at the mall. Let's do this. Kayla walked to the front entrance. Okay, we're searching for a stroller that comes with 2 dolls. And if you see anything to do with Spider-Man while you're looking, let me know. Noah's a fanatic. What about Ethan? Andrew watched as the outside metal doors opened into a clothing store and the crowd poured in. People ran every which way, grabbing shirts and jackets off the rack. He couldn't help cringing. A tablet. Kayla read off the notepad in her hand. Sorry, what kind of tablet? I was busy staring at the madness. He nodded toward the store. They have some good sales on clothes for the kids. We'll go there later. Kayla put the notepad away. Anyway, it's one of those new kid-friendly tablets. Andrew searched the names of the stores and pointed toward one down the hallway. They'll most likely have it. But let's get the other things for Noah and Evie first. Kayla frowned up at him. Don't you think we need to go there and grab it? We might be too late. Well, that all depends. If you wanted a Kindle or an iPad, your best bet is probably online, since they only stock a few at each store. Or I can get you the brand new HD X154. He took out his phone and checked the app he'd made to go along with the tool on his laptop. It had been Josh's idea to make it mobile. There are only a couple of stores even selling that here in Plymouth. How do you know that? She raised an eyebrow as they walked toward the toy store. Andrew held up the phone. They're my biggest client right now. I'm actually hoping to sell this technology to them in the next week or two. Kayla stared up at him with wide eyes. Seriously? Ethan's been eyeing that tablet ever since the commercial started. I'm still reeling myself. These accounts usually go to the top agents, but one is getting married, and another turned down this one because his other clients went big. Worked for me, though. I've been able to try out my new program on a big seller, and from what I've found so far, this app seems to be doing its job. Andrew put the phone back in his pocket as they walked into the toy store. So you promise shopping in there won't kill me? Only if you go for the hottest items, and I tend to shy away from them. They're priced too high, and my kids already have their favorites without needing the latest trend. It won't last long, but I'll enjoy it while I can. Andrew laughed as he grabbed a cart and followed Kayla as she wound through the aisles, checking prices. She set a few toys, like blocks and dolls, into the cart, but skipped the remote control cars and video games. Hey, what about this? Andrew showed her a princess dress with a small tiara and shoes that matched. The costumes are on sale, and this one would fit Evie. A shadow passed over Kayla's face as she took it from him. This would look great on her, wouldn't it? It's perfect. Andrew watched as she put it in the cart and turned away. The light-hearted smile that had been there before was now replaced with a slight frown. He should have just kept his mouth shut. I'm going to go find a couple of things for my niece and nephew, if that's okay. She looked over at him in surprise, as if she'd forgotten he was there. Oh. Okay. Sure. I'll be right there. Andrew wandered through the store staring at the toys in front of him, giving Kayla a chance to think. He'd obviously done something wrong, but he didn't know what he'd said. Besides, he really did need to shop for Val's kids. He didn't even know how old Kennedy and Jason were by now. He hadn't seen them in 5 years. They'd have to be about 10. Figuring Legos were always safe, he weaved his way through to find the right sets. Kayla met up with him a couple of minutes later. Ready to go? We need to get over to the clothing store before everything is gone. Oh, right. Yes. He took the Legos up to the front and stood in line to pay. He leaned against the shelf while he waited for his turn. When the silence went on for several minutes, he couldn't take it anymore. I'm sorry if I said something wrong back there. It wasn't you. It's just that. Mike used to call Evie his little princess. Her eyes met his. I haven't really bought her anything like that since he left. It just hit me. I don't blame you. If it was that hard, you don't have to get it, you know. He gave her an encouraging smile and set his stuff on the counter to pay. Kayla shook her head. You're right. It would be cute on her, and she's totally into princesses even though I never encouraged it. I was just being selfish. Hey, you were hurt by him. It makes sense to shut things out. He slid his card through the reader. Once Kayla was done paying, they left the store and walked back over to the clothing store that had just opened. It was still crowded, and they could see from where they were standing that the lines were long. Want to try somewhere else? She adjusted her bags. That might be good. Plus, we need to unload what we already have. Andrew walked toward the exit, but stopped outside the electronics store. They have the exact printer I wanted. Kayla held out her already full hands. Hand me your 2 bags and I'll take them out to the car. Then you can grab it. It's fine. I'll come with you. I want to check prices in a few places. Plus, this sale doesn't start for another hour. I'm pretty sure you won't find it cheaper anywhere near here. They're pretty competitive with their prices, which is why they've almost gone under a few times over the years. She felt for her keys in her pocket. Shoot. I think my keys are in my purse. Andrew took the bags from her so she could sort through her things. He could still feel the touch of her fingers as they brushed his hand a few minutes later as they left the mall. The wind had picked up, and clouds billowed in the sky, promising a storm. They set their things in the car and went back inside. By that time, the crowds had grown around the displays. Andrew held back. This was exactly what he'd hoped to avoid. Too many people all wanting the same items at once. He'd seen the brawl play out on the news enough times to be comfortable standing there. Maybe we should just try somewhere else. Or I can order it online. Kayla laughed and pulled him into the store. No, this is the joy of the hunt. You have to earn the right to that printer. Earn the right? What are we, cavemen? Andrew followed her into the store, enjoying her arm looped through his, pretty much. Okay, where's the printer you wanted? Andrew led her back to the display, already surrounded by several people. His senses were fully aware of the fact that she still hadn't let go of him as they took their place. He leaned down so he could whisper. This is crazy. I think there are more people than printers. Then we just have to be faster, she whispered back. I'm going on the other side so we have a better chance. And just like that, she let go of his arm and walked away. Andrew watched as she pushed her way into the crowd and grinned at him. He smiled back, a small tingle of excitement and nervousness playing in his stomach. He'd known her for less than 24 hours, but he knew that he didn't want to let her out of his life. There was something about her that put him at ease, even in the midst of the chaos in the store. Time ticked down as employees and security guards got into place throughout the store, most likely to avoid brawls. Andrew shook his head. What was he doing here again? Part of him just wanted to leave and go back to the safety of the house, but Kayla's eyes kept him mesmerized. As the manager warned people to be civil and line up in an orderly fashion for the checkout lines, Andrew could feel the excitement building in the crowd. The moment the clock turned to 7, people started grabbing at the electronics in front of them. Andrew watched as the pile dwindled before he could even get to it. He pushed his way through and reached for the last printer at the same time as a woman who had to be in her 70s. You take it. He picked it up and handed it to her. You reached for it first. It's yours. She turned to go, but Andrew stopped her and set it in her arms. I was there first, but only to hand it to you. I can get another one. Merry Christmas. She smiled. Thank you. My granddaughter will be thrilled. As she turned, he caught the glint in her eye. He shook his head and turned to see Kayla laughing. You just had to give her the last printer, didn't you? I was being nice. He watched as the old woman spoke to the family she was with and pointed over at him. Their laughter was enough to tell him he'd been tricked. She didn't really need it, did she? Oh, she probably did. But she totally used you. Good thing I got one before they were gone. She walked to a display a few feet away and pulled out a printer, smiling. Thankfully, no one saw me hide it or there would have been trouble. Andrew laughed as he took it from her. I have many things to learn, I see. Yes. Now, let's get in line or we'll be stuck here for hours. Kayla picked up a few packages of batteries and went to stand behind the old woman. Andrew repositioned the printer in his arms and joined Kayla. So, I have my printer, and you have enough batteries to last a lifetime. Are we done? Almost. We have the annual Christmas pajamas to grab, and then a few stocking stuffers before heading back to my mom's. If you're worn out, I can take you right now, though. Kayla took a step forward as they moved closer to the cashier. I'm fine. Andrew yawned, betraying just how tired he really was. Maybe he should have at least tried to sleep the night before. Of course, he hadn't expected to be in the middle of a mall either. Kayla studied his face. Maybe I should take you home. Josh is probably wondering where you are right now. Andrew shrugged away her concern. I'm fine. We might as well finish shopping while we're here. If you're sure, I'm sure. Let's do this. Kayla's eyes lit up. Great. Afterward, I can take you to my favorite place to get hot chocolate. Chapter 3. Kayla sat across the table from Andrew and watched him take his first sip. He closed his eyes in pleasure and set down the mug. Okay, you win. Some hot chocolates are better than others. Andrew wiped his mouth with a napkin. I can almost pretend that I don't miss my coffee. Just wait. Tomorrow and forever after this, you'll be craving another mug of this perfection. Kayla mixed the whipped cream into her drink. This had been her favorite place as a child, and she made it a habit to come here every time she visited her parents. It was near the way too personal limit by bringing Andrew here, but she didn't know if she'd have the chance to come again before heading home. Andrew took another drink before checking his watch. Shouldn't we be getting back to your kids? Kayla showed him the text from her mom. They're having fun making cookies with Grandma. I'll be good for another hour or two. That must be amazing, having your kids so close to your parents. He smiled, but his eyes showed his own pain. It's wonderful. She couldn't imagine not spending so much time with her family. So, what do you have on your plate between now and Christmas? Andrew tapped his spoon in his mug. Well, let's see. I have a meeting about the software Josh and I developed. He's finishing up the last of the bugs right now. Silver Script has their big Christmas party, and I need to get ready for the spring line. What about you? Ethan's playing indoor soccer, so he has a few more games, and then he has a choir concert. And I have to get ready for tax season, which will take up the rest of my time. Thankfully, Noah and Evie aren't in sports or anything else. Kayla finished the last of her hot chocolate. She was tempted to grab a refill for the drive back to the house. I can imagine. Andrew checked his phone and frowned. I need to get back. Something happened with a commercial slot. Kayla slid her arms into her coat and reached for her purse. No problem. You saved me from a sugar coma. What do you mean? Andrew stood and put his coat on. I was just about to order more hot chocolate. But since you have to get back, I won't. Instead of heading for the door like Kayla had expected, Andrew went over to the counter. She shrugged and walked up behind him, and realized he'd ordered 2 cups to go. He pulled out his wallet, but she put her hand on his arm. I can pay for my own. This is on me. He turned back to the cashier. Can we grab 2 of those muffins as well? Kayla watched the teen take 2 from the shelf and shove them into a bag. There was no way Andrew could have known they were her favorite, but it still sent a thrill through her as they walked out the door. Hope you're hungry. Andrew handed the cup to her. Even if I wasn't, there's no way I'd miss out. Thank you. Kayla unlocked the doors and climbed in. Once their food was set between them, she backed out and turned toward home. They didn't speak much on the way, but it was a comfortable silence, something Kayla hadn't expected. A heavy rain began to fall as they organized everything. After making sure all the gifts were hidden safely under blankets in her car, Kayla and Andrew hurried into the house. Once inside, they slipped off their coats and hung them on the rack. Kayla went straight for the dining room and glanced behind her to say goodbye to Andrew, but he headed for his room, already talking on the phone. She shook her head and followed the noises of the grandkids surrounding the table. Mommy! Evie yelled. Her hands were covered in dough, and her face was almost white because of the flour from the cookies. Hey, sweetie. She stood behind Noah and Ethan, watching as they cut out leaves and turkeys to put on the cookie sheet. Wow, you've been busy. Noah beamed. I made 5 turkeys and 10 leaves. That's more than Ethan. Yes, but mine look better, Ethan muttered. They're all good, Kayla said, trying to stop an argument before it started. Where's Grandma? Evie pointed toward the kitchen. Grandma. Thanks, Evie. Kayla walked into the kitchen and watched as her mom slid a pan into the oven. You guys have been busy. Oh, there you are. How was shopping? It was fun. I got a lot of Christmas shopping done and helped Andrew get the printer he wanted. Kayla picked up a spatula and scooped the baked cookies from the pan and put them on a waiting plate. Mom smiled. I'm glad you took him. When I realized Charlotte had stayed home, I worried that you were out there alone. Kayla shook her head in amusement. I was hardly alone with the hundreds of other shoppers. But yes, it was nice to have company. You know what I mean. Anyway, we'll have lunch in an hour. Mom turned the water on in the sink. I can finish the cookies, Kayla said. You've already done so much. Mom patted her on the shoulder and headed back into the dining room with the grandkids. Rain pounded against the window as it came down in sheets. It was storms like this that made her miss home. She'd loved snuggling up in front of the fire with her parents and siblings as they read or watched a movie together, trying to drown out the roar of the storm outside. If her parents were gone during one of these downpours, Kayla, her sisters, and Josh would run through the rain and get drenched within seconds. The oven timer beeped, her back into the present. She rinsed the pan and set it aside to get the cookies out of the oven. As she pulled out the pan, she noticed Josh standing in the doorway with his coat on, holding his hat in his hands. Hey, we're taking off. In this? You won't even be able to see the road. Kayla set the cookies down and moved around the counter to hug her brother. You know it's only going to get worse. Besides, we found out the meeting with the electronics company is Monday, and I want to work out a couple of bugs in the program. His face glowed with excitement. Do you know what this could mean? It could mean that someone will finally realize what a genius my brother is. Kayla smiled. Good luck on Monday. Thanks. Josh grabbed a cookie from the tray and took a bite. He closed his eyes. I'd forgotten how much I love these. Kayla took a paper plate from the cupboard and loaded it. Here. Mom will never be able to eat this many, and you two have a long drive ahead of you. Josh covered the plate with tin foil and then picked it up. You're the best. I know. Now go before it gets worse. She nudged him toward the door. And you owe me a visit to my apartment sometime, by the way. You haven't been to see me since I moved back. Kayla sighed. I know. We'll try to come by when it's time to take the kids to see the Christmas lights. You'd better. He leaned forward and whispered, I'll make sure Andrew is there. Bye, Josh. Kayla followed him to the front door, where Andrew stood. Have a safe trip. It was nice to meet you, Andrew. Thanks again for coming with me this morning. Andrew grinned. And thanks for putting up with my rookie mistakes. Maybe I'll see you in New York sometime. That would be great. She ignored the delight on her mom's face. She'd hear about this for the rest of the weekend. The storm finally blew itself out in the middle of the night, leaving everything outside fresh. Kayla slammed the trunk shut and checked the seat belts for her kids one more time before turning to her parents. Thanks again for the wonderful weekend. I'm hoping to make it for Christmas. I'll let you know as it gets closer. She hugged her mom and then her dad. Mom blew a kiss to Evie, then turned back to Kayla. We'll be here. Did you get the leftovers from the counter? Yes, Mom. Kayla opened her car door. Love you. See you later. As they drove away, Kayla made sure the windows were open so they could wave and yell goodbye. They made their way through town and stopped to get one more cup of hot chocolate for her and a muffin for the kids, then headed onto the highway. The kids played on their tablets while Kayla hummed to Christmas music, the only thing she could find on the radio. Maybe she'd get a tree that night. She'd have to see if any of the lots were up yet. They arrived home in the early afternoon, and Ethan jumped out of the car as soon as Kayla parked. Evie and Noah followed shortly after, leaving Kayla to unload everything. Usually, she would have them help with the smaller things, but the gifts needed to stay hidden, and Ethan was good about distracting the others so she could get everything inside. Once the last bag was unloaded, Kayla took the boxes she didn't want them to see and hid them in her closet. She found Ethan playing a board game with his brother and sister in their room and gave him a thumbs up before going down to figure out dinner. The phone rang a few hours later as they were getting ready for bed. Kayla frowned when she saw the caller ID and almost didn't answer it, but she knew it wasn't fair to the kids to keep them from their dad. Hello? Her voice shook, though she wasn't sure if it was anger or nervousness that caused it. Hey, how's it going? How was your Thanksgiving? The husky voice that had once sent a thrill through her was now enough to make her want to hang up. Kayla gripped the phone. It was nice, thank you. The kids missed you. There was a slight pause before he said, I missed them too. We'd hoped to have them spend the holiday with us, but I could never get a hold of you. You know what Thanksgiving means to my family. It would have broken my mom's heart not to have them there. Kayla tried to keep the anger out of her voice as her kids glanced up at her. Right. The whole history thing. So, are they still awake? Can I talk to them? Kayla handed the phone to Ethan, feigning a smile. It's your dad. Ethan's face lit up as he took it from her. Hey, Dad. Make sure Noah and Evie have a chance, she whispered and left the room. He always seemed to call when things were going well and ruin them. Later, after putting them all to bed, she dropped onto the couch and turned on the TV. It was the perfect night for a Christmas movie. She needed something to cheer her up, and it was already too late to go find a tree. Chapter 4. Andrew stared at the computer screen in front of him, checking and double-checking to make sure the program worked just right. It was a big deal that Holt Electronics had asked to hear about it, and he didn't want to mess things up. Josh knocked on the cubicle wall and leaned against it. Ready to go? Almost. I'm just checking one last section. Andrew clicked through to the last page. You know it works. Come on. Josh readjusted the strap on his laptop bag. Andrew didn't say anything as he finished scrolling through the page. Everything seemed to be in order. He closed his laptop, set it inside his bag, and stood to grab his jacket. You have your notes? Hey, I'm the one who built this thing, remember? I know it inside and out. We'll be fine. Josh headed for the door, and Andrew put on his jacket before hurrying to catch up. You have the address? He couldn't help peppering Josh with questions as they went. His nerves were getting the best of him, even though he'd worked with clients countless times before. But this was personal. Josh slapped Andrew on the back. Dude, calm down. You know they're going to love it, he said and grinned. Andrew nodded. You're right. I just wish we had time for a few more test runs. I think Black Friday was the perfect day to test it. And we fixed the glitches we found. Josh flagged down a taxi and gave the driver directions to Holt Electronics. So, have you heard from my sister yet? What? Andrew laughed. Why would I hear from your sister? Josh raised his eyebrows. Come on. You spent more time with her this weekend than I've seen you spend with any woman since I moved back here. You totally swore off shopping on Friday, and yet when I woke up, I found out you'd taken off with her. I think that's saying something. I already told you I just didn't want her to go alone, Andrew mumbled. Never mind that he'd spent the whole weekend staring at his phone, wondering if he should call, right? Josh leaned forward. I think the building is just up there. The driver nodded and switched lanes. It was silent in the car until they climbed out and Josh paid the fare. Andrew took a deep breath as he looked up at the building in front of him. Pushing down the last of his stress, he strode through the doors and went straight for the elevator. He caught Josh's smirk as they headed up to the 10th floor. Yes? Nothing. It's just good to see you finally looking so determined. I thought you were going to be sick the whole way here and that I was going to have to drag you in there. Pretty sure those two expressions are closely related. Just make sure you don't mess up the presentation. Andrew straightened his tie and chuckled as he caught the uncertainty on Josh's face. I'm kidding. It was my turn, remember? Josh ran his fingers through his hair and cleared his throat as he walked up to the receptionist. Hi, we're here for a 3:30 appointment with Holt Electronics. The receptionist smiled, showing a dimple in her cheek. Andrew watched in amusement as Josh blushed. She handed him a clipboard and 2 badges. Just fill that out and they'll call you back in a few minutes. She nodded toward Andrew, but her gaze went back to Josh. Andrew couldn't wait for the endless tormenting he could inflict on Josh when this presentation was over. He finished filling out his part of the form just as their names were called. The slight panic returned, but he knew they were ready. The CEO of Holt Electronics stood at the end of the table, and Andrew knew this was a big deal. He'd expected to talk to one of the lower bosses, but this was their whole board, from the looks of it. The feeling of panic he'd had on the ride there was back in full force. He shook each of their hands in turn and took his spot at the end of the table while Josh opened his laptop and attached it to the projector. The numbers, graphs, and itemizations they'd prepared showed up on screen, and Andrew waited for the go-ahead before launching into his presentation. Josh and Andrew left the building in a daze. The interview had been grueling as the board asked questions about how things ran, how far the program reached, and the potential for growth. They wanted to run through every step in the process. Andrew's head pounded, but he was pretty happy with how well he and Josh had been able to answer the questions. He waited until they were in the cab before speaking. Well, that was insane. No kidding. I can't believe you were able to twist their last question into a movie reference without them even noticing. Josh laughed. Man, I'm drained. I make it a goal to have at least one reference in every client meeting. I was afraid I'd fail this time. Anyway, let's go get a drink before heading back to work. I need to wind down after that interview or I'll be a mess for the rest of the day. Andrew gestured toward a small diner a block away, and the driver let them out. He paid the fare, and they went into the diner to find somewhere to sit. Josh studied the small restaurant. This isn't exactly what I was thinking when you said, drink, but I'm starving. Have you been here before? No, but I've wanted to try it out for a while now. Andrew's stomach growled as he looked through the menu. Good thing my next meeting isn't for another hour. I think I want one of each. That'll take longer than an hour. Josh smiled up at the waitress. Hey, I'll have a chocolate shake and a burger. I think I'll have the ranch burger, fries, and a caramel shake. Andrew handed the waitress his menu and leaned back in his chair. So, do you think they'll buy it? Josh picked up a salt packet and played with it. I think they'd be crazy not to, and they seemed pretty happy with what we had to offer. Andrew nodded. I agree. Let's just hope they do too. I'm just glad we got it over with so I can work on my accounts. This car commercial is going to make me crazy by the time the filming is over. They keep changing their minds about how they want it. Josh shook his head. I had that account last year and told Deborah I refused to work with them again. Andrew found a piece of paper and a pen. Use this agency, and ask for these models. Insist on shooting on Staten Island, and tell them if you go anywhere else, the budget will have to go up. It's the only way I could get them to agree on anything. Plus, the agency has had fewer no-shows than the others I've worked with. Josh took the paper from him. Thanks. I've had them complain and ask for the other agent a few times. I had no clue it was you. They kept calling you Stan or something. Andrew laughed. Yeah, I couldn't convince them that they had my name wrong, so I finally just went with it. Brilliant. Josh put the note in his laptop bag as the waitress walked up with their orders. Ah, this looks amazing. Thank you. No prob, need any sauce or ketchup? The waitress took 2 straws out of her apron. Andrew took his plate. I'm good. Thanks. I'll have some barbecue sauce. Josh sprinkled salt on his burger. He was always doing strange things with his food. Andrew took a bite of his own food. The ranch dressing was creamy with a spiciness to it. Just how he liked his burger. The milkshake was perfect as well. Hey, speaking of my sister, we weren't talking about your sister, Andrew interrupted. Okay, fine, but now we are. Anyway, Ethan has soccer on Friday, and Kayla invited me to go to the game and then dinner after. Want to come? Andrew laughed. I don't think she'd like me just showing up. Besides, I need to get a lot of work done. Josh waved dismissively. You can do it before Friday, and she'd love to have you. Besides, what else do you have this weekend? Nothing. I'd set it aside specifically to catch up on my accounts. I put enough work into our program that I missed a few deadlines, and I really don't want to get fired. You can work in the car. I'll be driving, and it takes half an hour on a good day, which means an hour or so on a Friday. Josh leaned forward. You know you want to, right? Andrew sighed. Maybe. It just depends on what I can get done in the next few days. If I'm still behind, I'll stay home. Deal. This way, you can ask her to the company Christmas party. Andrew nearly choked on the bite in his mouth. What are you talking about? We need dates, right? I was thinking of asking Heather. Or maybe that receptionist at Holt, since she slipped me her number. But you need someone, and since Kayla is the first girl I've really seen you talk to, I figured you'd ask her. I'll have to think. Wait, when did she give you her number? Andrew looked at him in surprise when I handed her the name badges. He pulled a scrap of paper out of his jacket. Andrew grinned. Look, you need a date. Just come with me. You can decide while we're at the game. If things are weird, you don't have to, but I think you'd both enjoy it. You realize how weird it is that you're trying to set me up with your sister, right? Most people would be against it. Josh shrugged. I saw you two together. She was happier than I've seen her in years. She actually joked with you. From what Andrew had noticed over Thanksgiving from her family, it was fairly obvious she hadn't been around a guy for a while, but it was easy to forget that when they were together. Except for the one time when she'd brought up her ex, she'd been happy. Maybe I do have a chance with her. I'll try to go on Friday, but don't think that means I'm going to take her to the party. Not that I would mind, Andrew could feel himself blush. I don't know if she'd want to go with me. She will. We just have to remind her of that. Josh handed his credit card to the waitress when she brought the check. For now, we'd better get back to the office. Andrew popped the last bite of hamburger into his mouth and pulled out his card as well. While taking Kayla to the party had crossed his mind, he'd figured it wasn't a possibility. She was busy with her 3 kids, and he'd been too busy to call. Josh and Andrew put on their jackets and took a taxi back to the ad agency. Andrew set his stuff at his desk and removed his laptop from his bag. Holt Electronics had told him that it would be a few days before they reached their decision, so the best thing to distract himself from checking the phone every few seconds was to bury himself in his contracts. Thoughts of spring fashion and the new lines weren't enough to keep his mind from wandering back to his conversation with Josh, however. He'd felt rather out of place the year before without a date, and this was the perfect chance to ask Kayla out. If Josh thought it was a possibility, Andrew wasn't about to let the opportunity slip by. Andrew pored over the work samples, telling himself that he'd talk to her later. He made a face at a couple of the more outrageous styles, but considering that he preferred a t-shirt and jeans to the suit he wore to work every day, he wasn't exactly the best judge of fashion. He started putting together a mock-up of the ad, wondering why Aaron or someone else hadn't taken this account. He was usually in charge of electronics or car ads, and he was perfectly okay with that. After choosing several models to audition, he sent an email to the agency director and moved on to the next ad. The Super Bowl commercials were pretty much ready to go, but he needed to make sure production was going well. He had enough to keep his mind busy until the end of the workday. He closed his laptop and left the office, waving at Josh as he headed out. He picked up some groceries at the store a few blocks down before hopping on the subway to his house. He'd bought an old home to fix up, and it was proving to be more work than he'd bargained for. This week would be spent doing repairs on the house and finishing up the ads that had been put off. The thought of going to see Kayla on Friday was enough to make sure of that. Chapter 5. Kayla put her plate in the sink and checked the time. We only have 10 minutes before Josh gets here. Go find your shoes. Ethan and Noah jumped up and ran for their rooms, and Kayla rinsed out a rag in the sink. I can help, Evie called. Kayla turned just as her daughter lifted the carton of milk and spilled some on the table. No. Leave it right there. Her voice made Evie jump and drop the carton. Milk shot across the table and dripped down onto the floor below, drenching her from her waist down. She stared up at her mom in shock. Oh, sweetie. Don't move. Kayla grabbed several of her kitchen towels and set them on the mess and let them soak up the milk. She scooped up Evie and headed into the bathroom to clean her off before changing her clothes. When Kayla went back out into the kitchen, she found Ethan and Noah down on the floor mopping everything up. She carried the soaking towels into the laundry room and got new cloths to help clean the floor. What happened? Ethan stood up and stared at his wet hands. Your sister wanted to help. Thank you for cleaning it up. I don't know what I'd do without you. I'm going to hurry and change so we can leave. She kissed the top of Ethan's head and then Noah's, thankful that her boys were such good helpers. Make sure she stays out of trouble. Ethan took Evie's hand and led her into the family room. Noah gave Kayla the last towel before running after his siblings. Kayla started the washer and sighed as she went back to her room. So much for dressing nicely for Andrew. She pulled her hair up into a ponytail and glanced in the mirror. It will have to do. She grabbed her jacket and keys. Mommy? Josh is here. Ethan glanced at the door. He brought Andrew again. I know he did. That just means more people will be there to cheer for you. Are you ready? Ethan nodded and walked past Josh and Andrew without saying anything. Josh watched him pass before turning back to Kayla with raised eyebrows. I have no idea what's going on in his head, Kayla said. Josh, can you get Noah buckled up? I'll grab Evie. Kayla was surprised to see Evie reaching so Andrew could pick her up. Wow. She doesn't go to anyone. Andrew keeps candy in his pocket. Josh grinned before throwing Noah over his shoulder. Come on, buddy. Let's go watch some soccer. Kayla laughed as she checked to make sure the door was locked. I can take her. Nah, I've got her. Which side of the car does she sit on? Andrew walked out to the car and waited for Kayla. She sits right behind me. Kayla opened the door. Thanks for coming, Josh. Ethan's excited that you came, even if he's not showing that right now. Josh shrugged. He's shy. I get it. Okay, we'll follow you. Same place as before? Yep. I'll see you there. As Kayla drove toward the soccer fields, she checked to make sure Andrew and Josh were still behind her. She pulled out her ponytail and brushed her fingers through her hair. She'd forgotten just how good-looking Andrew was. And when he'd held Evie. Mommy? Why is Andrew here? Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts. Josh invited him. Kayla couldn't quite meet her son's eyes in the mirror. He's too smart for his own good. There was silence for a moment. Does he like you? I don't know, bud. Do you like him? Kayla hesitated, then said, yes, I do. But he's just here with Josh. I like him too. He makes you smile. Ethan didn't say anything else, but his words shook Kayla. Was it so obvious that she'd been miserable? I like him too, Noah piped up. He makes good paper airplanes. Kayla laughed. And we all know how important that is. When he did make those for you? At Grandma's. They flew all the way across the room. He promised to show me how. Noah had been obsessed with airplanes for a few years. That's great. Kayla turned into the parking lot of the indoor soccer building. Ethan and Noah were out of the car before she had it turned off. She shook her head and helped Evie out. Josh took Evie from Kayla so she could catch up to her boys. She checked Ethan in, and he went over to meet his team. Noah stood next to her, staring down at his feet. She crouched down next to him. Are you supposed to take off like that? I was just racing Ethan. Noah stuck out his bottom lip, but then instantly cheered up when he saw Josh walk in. Uncle Josh. Come sit by me. Kayla took Evie's hand, and they went to find a place to sit. She shook her head as she noticed how Josh maneuvered all of their seating arrangements so that she'd be next to Andrew, not that she minded. Ethan's game started soon after, and Kayla alternated between cheering and chasing Evie. She'd brought toys to play with, but climbing bleachers was just too tempting for her little 3-year-old. Every time Evie jumped in front of Andrew, Kayla would cringe. It wasn't that he'd shown any annoyance. He would just laugh it off and keep watching the game. I want to go home, Mommy. Evie stuck out her lip. Kayla sighed as she sorted through her bag to find the cereal she'd packed. She needed to find a new babysitter before Ethan's next game or she'd go crazy. We'll go home as soon as the game is over. Andrew ducked as one of Evie's toys went flying over his head. He laughed and took it back from the man behind him. Wow, she's got a good arm. That's because she's constantly throwing her toys. Kayla's face burned as she shoved the toys in the bag. Evie, come back here. Here, let me take her. She can run back and forth, and you can watch Ethan. Josh held out his arms for Evie, and she jumped into them. Thank you. Kayla smiled gratefully. Josh took the cereal from Kayla. No prob. I sat all day. I want to get up and walk around anyway. Kayla watched them for a moment before turning back to the game. Ethan was playing forward, his favorite position. The other team was good and fast, but Ethan weaved his way through them and shot at the goal. The ball bounced off the wall, but he kicked it right back in. Kayla jumped up and cheered as Ethan grinned and ran back to the center of the field. Your son is fast. Andrew had to lean in close for Kayla to hear him. His breath tickled her ear, sending her emotions into chaos. He is. Soccer is his favorite thing to do, and he practices constantly in our backyard. Kayla watched as Ethan passed the ball to a teammate. Her hands clenched in anticipation. She tried to relax, knowing Andrew was right next to her. It was hard not to get too into the game, but she didn't want to make a fool of herself in front of him. Did you play? Andrew asked. Kayla nodded. Just city soccer. Our school was really competitive, and I was too busy writing for the paper. Andrew clapped as Ethan's team scored again. They're unstoppable. They've been together for a couple of years now. It's nice because they know how to work with the others on their team. Kayla glanced over to find Evie sprinting down the hallway with Josh close behind. She should probably go take over for him, but she didn't want to miss the game. Having Andrew right next to her also kept her from wanting to move. Besides, Josh had said he could handle her. Noah tugged on Kayla's shirt. I'm hungry, Mommy. Kayla found another bag of cereal and handed it to him. Here you go. Noah settled down in his chair, and Kayla turned back to the game just in time to see Ethan get knocked to the ground. She stood up and shouted, "Hey!" Adrenaline shot through her. She took a step toward the edge of the bleachers just as Ethan jumped up and ran toward the ball. She forced herself to take deep breaths. Rough play was the hardest part of watching the game. He's fine, Andrew said. And tougher than you'd expect, to recover from that hit. I can't believe they didn't call it. He placed a hand on Kayla's arm, sending tingles through her. When he moved his hand away, she instantly felt the loss. Are you okay? He asked. Kayla nodded. I hate not being able to do anything. Afterwards, you can take him for ice cream. I think that'll make him feel much better. Andrew nudged her and smiled before turning back to the game. As soon as the game was over, Ethan ran and threw his arms around Kayla's waist. Mom, did you see my goals? I made 3. That's a new record. It was amazing, sweetie. Kayla hugged him back and handed him his coat. He grinned, obviously proud of himself, and put on his coat. Coach thinks I should try out for a competitive team. Can I? We'll check into it, but I think it's a great idea. Kayla ruffled his hair. She'd studied several of the clubs in the area, but the cost was enough to make her put off the decision. She turned to Josh and Andrew. Thanks again for coming, and for chasing Evie. You're probably exhausted. Josh laughed. I could use a nap. I'm taking these munchkins home. I'm thinking Evie will sleep well tonight. She picked her up, but wait, don't you want to have dinner before you head home? Josh glanced between Kayla and Andrew. Kayla raised her eyebrows. Oh, right. You guys probably haven't eaten. Let's get Ethan home to change, and then we can go out. Does that work? Works for me, Josh said. They walked out to the car and headed back to Kayla's house. Evie and Noah were asleep by the time they made it home. Kayla took Evie in and went back out to get Noah, but Josh already had him in his arms. I guess it's just the two of you after all. I'm sorry. Kayla couldn't help the disappointment that washed over her. Josh stretched and yawned. You know, I might actually want to catch a nap before heading home. Why don't you two grab something and bring it back to the house? I'll be ready by the time you're done. Kayla resisted the urge to roll her eyes. We already had cereal before heading to the game. You rest, and I'll find something for you two to eat. No, we don't want to put you out. Josh handed Kayla her coat and nudged her toward the door. The kids will be fine while you're gone. Go. Are you sure? Evie can be a handful to get ready for bed, Kayla said. She tried to turn again, but Josh opened the door and guided her outside. She's asleep. I'll be fine. Josh waved and closed the door, leaving Kayla and Andrew standing on the porch. Andrew chuckled as they walked out to the car. I guess we know when we're not wanted, don't we? I'd say it was to get us out of the house, but I'm thinking Josh just wanted to watch cartoons with Ethan. Unless he stopped watching them while he was in college, which I doubt. Kayla slipped into her car and belted up. He still watches them, Andrew said with a chuckle. So, where should we go? What are you in the mood for? He tapped his fingers on the armrest. I'm thinking pizza. Unless you have something else in mind. You know the area better than I do. Pizza it is. Kayla pulled out of the driveway and headed into town. She drove past the chain restaurants, found a small building off the main road, and parked. It's not much on the outside, but you haven't had pizza until you've had this. Sounds perfect. Andrew opened the door for her, and they walked inside. The lights were dim, and tablecloths covered the tables that were squished into the small room. A few families were seated, but otherwise, it was empty. A teenage boy came over and pulled out 2 menus. Oh, hey, Kayla. Just the two of you tonight? Yep. Can we get a table near one of the windows? Of course. He led them over to a table near the back. Is this good? It's great. Thanks. Kayla sat, took one of the menus from the boy, and opened it. She caught the amused expression on Andrew's face. "I might come here often enough that they know me," she said with a smirk. "Of course, I usually have my kids, so we're a little hard to miss." Andrew opened his menu. "Okay, what's good here?" "I usually just order whatever the kids want, but I love their Canadian bacon or their supreme pizza. Oh, and we need the cheesy bread. It's the best." The same boy came back to the table. "Do you know what you'd like to drink?" "I'll have a root beer," Kayla said. "And I think we're ready to order." "Root beer sounds good to me too." Andrew handed the boy his menu. "Perfect drink for pizza." He nodded to Kayla. "Then I think we'll have an extra large Canadian bacon pizza and some cheesy breadsticks." The waiter wrote down the order. "I'll get those drinks out to you in a sec." Kayla took off her coat and hung it over her chair. "You know you didn't have to order that. There were lots of other options." "I know, but it came highly recommended." Andrew grinned. "It's a good thing you listened, then." Kayla studied the checkered print on the tablecloth, trying to think of something to say. "So, how did the meeting go? I mean, didn't you and Josh pitch your software to a company this week?" "We did, but we haven't heard anything back yet." "I think it went well. Josh is pretty sure we'll be able to sell it to them, but I'm still keeping my fingers crossed." Kayla clasped his hand in excitement. "That's so amazing. Congrats." Andrew glanced down, and Kayla quickly pulled away. "Hey, don't be embarrassed," he said. Kayla could feel her face burning. "What was I thinking?" She liked the guy, but she wasn't ready for someone yet, even if she could still feel his touch, and she ached to reach out again. "Can I ask you something?" He hesitated for a second. "And you're totally welcome to tell me, it's none of my business, but I've been dying to know." "Yeah?" Kayla could feel her guard coming up. "Your mom mentioned that you used to write, and then, at the game, you said something about writing for the school paper instead of playing competitive soccer. If you enjoyed it so much, why did you stop?" Kayla looked at him in surprise. This was the last thing she'd expected him to ask. Usually it was something about what had happened with Mike, or why she chose to go into accounting. But the writing? "I just did." He leaned forward. "But why?" "I saw those awards on your walls when I took your bags into your room at your parents' house." "Mike." Kayla winced. She hated bringing him up, especially on what was obviously a date set up by her meddling brother. He didn't approve. Andrew's eyes searched Kayla's, sending tingles through her. Just that one expression showed more tenderness than she'd seen for a long time. Kayla made a face. "That's putting it lightly. He loved to tell me that it would never make me any money, and that there was no point anyway because I needed to be home watching the kids instead of working." Andrew frowned. "And you put up with that?" She shrugged. "I was in love with him and wanted him to be happy. It got to the point where it wasn't worth fighting anymore, and I put away my writing. It disappointed my mom because she wanted me to follow in our ancestors' footsteps, but she didn't say anything. She tried, but I just told her to drop it. Mike's gone now. Why can't you just start over?" Andrew's finger trailed along Kayla's hand. "I tried." Kayla paused, distracted by the tingles running down her arm. She took a deep breath and continued on. "When I knew I suddenly had to be the one to make the money, I pulled out my old articles and sent them to magazines to apply for jobs, but no one would take them. And anything new I wrote was just filled with anger or despair." Kayla stopped again to see if she'd bored him, but he continued to watch her with a sympathetic smile. "One magazine did take an article, but then claimed it as their own, leaving my name completely out of it. I finally decided it wasn't worth it, so I turned to accounting. I'd done it for my dad's company, and it was my minor in college." Andrew's hand covered Kayla's, filling her with warmth. "I'm sorry," he said. "To have something like that taken away must have been so hard. It was the worst. But I've survived. I'm not sure I have anything in me now." Kayla took a deep breath and forced a smile. "Now that I've totally killed the mood, let's change the subject." "You didn't kill the mood. I asked you, remember?" He squeezed her hand and let go when the pizza was set on the table between them. "Oh, man. This smells amazing." They each took a slice and set it on their plates. Kayla took a bite and closed her eyes as the flavors burst in her mouth. Perfection. They both ate a couple of pieces, keeping the conversation light. "I guess we should save some for Josh," Kayla said. Andrew eyed the pizza as though he wanted more. "We can always order him another one." Kayla took one of the cheesy breadsticks and dipped it in pizza sauce. Andrew took a breadstick as well. "I shouldn't eat any more. I'm worried you're going to have to roll me out. A problem most people have when they leave here. I think they even offer it as a service." Kayla waved at the waiter. "I've really enjoyed tonight, but I'd better get home to save Josh. Evie is probably up and running with her second wind. Sounds about like her uncle." Andrew pulled out his wallet and handed his card to the waiter. Kayla laughed. "Yes, exactly. I can't even imagine what it was like to have him as a roommate. He was crazy enough as a teenager. It was probably about the same." Andrew put the leftover pizza and breadsticks into the box the waiter brought. "Ready?" Kayla slipped her arms into her coat sleeves and stood. "Thanks for paying. You didn't have to do that." "No, but I wanted to. You introduced me to the best pizza I've had in my entire life, so it's only fair." They walked out to the car, and Andrew opened the door for her, something Mike had never done. Kayla shook her head. Mike shouldn't have even come into her thoughts, but the stark contrast between him and Andrew made it hard not to compare them. As they drove back home, Andrew shared a few stories of Josh at college, and Kayla laughed until her sides hurt. When they pulled into her driveway, Andrew took her hand. Kayla's stomach clenched with excitement. It had been one thing as they sat at the table, but having him take it again meant that there was something between them. Or at least she hoped so. "Hey, there's something I've been wanting to ask you, but I haven't been able to get up the nerve." Kayla bit her lip. She'd already spilled her guts about the whole writing thing. "What else could he want? Our company Christmas party is coming up, and we're supposed to bring a date. I was wondering if you'd like to come with me." Again, Andrew had surprised her. She fully expected to feel the panic that usually set in when she was asked on a date, but all she felt was excitement. "I'll have to find a babysitter, but the party sounds like fun. Do we need to dress up?" "Well, it's black tie. If that's too much, we can just not go." Kayla ran through a mental inventory of her clothes and knew she'd need to go shopping. She grinned. "Let's do it." Andrew's face brightened. "Really? Awesome. Sure. When is it?" "Next Saturday. I'll pick you up around 6. Kayla checked her phone to make sure there was no game for Ethan and then typed in the party, even though she knew she'd be counting the seconds until then. "Okay, it's set." Andrew's grin confirmed the same excitement that was flowing through Kayla. They walked up to the front door. Kayla paused, wondering if she should hug him or something, but finally just opened the door and walked in to find Josh asleep on the couch. "I guess we didn't have to worry about Evie," Andrew whispered. "Nope, I guess not." Kayla met Andrew's eyes, swallowing hard. He was just inches away, and as much as she wanted him to close the gap, her mind fought it. "Thank you for the date." "You're welcome. The pizza was delicious. We'll have to go again soon." Andrew set the leftovers box on the coffee table and bent down to wake up Josh. "Hey, it's time to go." Josh sat up and looked around, blinking. "Wow. I didn't really expect to drift off." Behold the power of Evie. Kayla gestured to Josh, then to the box. We brought you some food. Josh leaned forward and opened the lid. Thanks. You guys are the best. I could have grabbed a burger on the way home. And missed this? We couldn't let you do that. Kayla turned to Andrew. Thanks again. He nodded and left the house with Josh, who was shoveling pizza into his mouth. Kayla stared at the door for a moment before shaking her head. What am I thinking? Yes, Andrew was the total opposite of Mike, but he was still a guy who had just asked her out. She'd heard about the silver script party from last year and couldn't believe she'd be going. Kayla stared at the mirror at the dress shop, telling herself for the 30th time that she was just going to cancel the date. She had to find the right dress, and her nerves were getting the best of her. This was her first official date with Andrew, and she kept thinking of reasons why she shouldn't go. Never mind that he'd sent a dozen roses the day before. She'd never had roses delivered to her. Her phone rang, making her scramble to find it in the pile of clothes that sat on the dressing room bench. Hello? They want it. Josh's voice burst through the phone. We sign the contract tomorrow. What? Really? That's fantastic. Kayla pushed her clothes aside and sat on the bench. What did they say? Are they offering you enough? And did you have someone look over the contract? We had a few people go through it, and we got a bigger offer than we could have hoped for. I can get out of this apartment and into something that doesn't come alive at night. Kayla grimaced. She'd already heard too many cockroach stories from him. That's good. But make sure you have the check in hand and know exactly what you're getting into before going off to get a suite by Central Park. Yes, I know, Mom. I'd better get going. I have a meeting in 5 minutes, but wanted to share the good news. I'm proud of you. See ya. Kayla hung up and stared at the mirror again. No, the red didn't quite work. Maybe she needed something in blue to bring out her eyes instead. Chapter 6. Andrew signed the last page of the contract with a flourish and slid it over to Josh. His heart beat with excitement. The contract was more than they had originally hoped for, and he couldn't believe they'd agreed to this price. The president of Holt Electronics sat across from them with a huge smile on his face. I think we're set. Any questions? Yeah. Do you have a bag we can breathe into? Josh laughed as he stood. Excuse me? He's just making a joke. Andrew shook the president's hand and then ushered Josh out of the room. His mind was still trying to process the fact that they'd just signed over a program they'd worked on for months, one that Josh had been working on through college before that. Josh waited until they had walked 2 blocks before he let out a loud whoop. Did you see all those zeros? Andrew couldn't help checking his laptop bag to make sure the copy of the contract was still there. I'm waiting until tomorrow morning to believe it. If they're all still there, I'll dance, when no one else is around. Fine, but let's at least go celebrate the signing. I don't know what to do with myself otherwise. Every night, I'd go home and work on this thing. Now what? Josh shook his head. I can't believe it. You go ahead. I need to finish up a few things. I'll meet you later tonight, okay? Dude, we just scored the biggest contract of the year, and you don't want to go celebrate? Andrew sighed. I need to pick up my tux for the Christmas party, and today is the only chance I have. Tomorrow is packed with meetings, and then I promised my pastor I'd help with a charity Christmas event thing. Believe me, I'd rather go out than play Santa. Josh raised an eyebrow. They're having you play Santa. You're too tall and definitely too thin. No one else would do it, and since I wasn't at the meeting, I was volunteered. Fine. Shoot me a text when you're done, and I'll give you the address for wherever I end up. Josh headed back toward the building they'd just left. Where are you going? Andrew called out. Josh shot him a sly grin and saluted as he walked into the building. Of course. The receptionist. Andrew chuckled and headed for the tux shop. He should have had this taken care of earlier, but between work and making sure everything was perfect for the meeting, he hadn't had time. Even now, he'd be lucky if he made it to the shop before it closed. Andrew flagged down a taxi, hoping it would get him there faster than the subway would. While they weaved through traffic, Andrew pulled out his copy of the contract to read it again. They'd get an advance check deposited into each of their accounts by the end of the day, and then the rest would come shortly after. The taxi pulled up to the curb next to the store, and Andrew climbed out. He walked into the posh store and instantly felt like he didn't fit in, even though he was wearing a suit. He'd come from a modest family home, so the fact that he could afford a place like this was still foreign to him. "May I help you, sir?" A woman smiled at him in what he thought was an "are you sure you're supposed to be in here" sort of way. "Yes, I need to pick up a tux. The name is Andrew Weston." He pulled the receipt out of his wallet. She glanced over it and nodded. "I'll have it right out." Andrew walked around the shop, searching through ties and cuff links. He looked up when the woman came from the back holding his tux. "Here you go. Why don't you try it on to make sure it fits correctly?" "Thank you." He went to the changing room and put it on. They'd done a fantastic job. Other places tended to make the pant legs and jacket sleeves shorter than he liked. He changed back into his other suit and put his tux in the dress bag. When he left the room, the woman raised her eyebrows in question. "Was it to your liking?" "Perfect. Thank you." He handed her a tip and left the building to go pick up the Santa suit he'd been forced to rent. When he had them all in hand, he took a taxi back to his house. No reason to drag them into a bar. Once he'd climbed into his old Nissan, he called Josh to get the address of the tavern. He normally hated driving through the city, but if he knew Josh, they'd be out past when the trains would run. The bar was dark except for the spotlight on the stage in the back. A beautiful woman who looked familiar sat on stage singing a soulful song as Andrew walked in to search for Josh. It wasn't until the song ended and the lights turned up that he was able to spot his friend to the left of the stage. He moved between the tables and sat in the empty chair next to Josh. "How'd you find this place?" Andrew took a couple of pretzels from the table and popped them in his mouth. "Nate loves to brag about it. That's his fiancée who was just performing up there. I figured I'd check it out to see if the food is really as good as he said." Andrew laughed. He'd heard Nate talking about it as well. Most of the agency probably had. "So, was he right? I suggest you order the bacon burger and cheese fries to decide for yourself." Josh took a drink and brightened. "Oh, hey, speaking of Nate, he's over at the bar." Andrew glanced behind him and saw Nate laughing at something the bartender had said. He turned around again. "Good. I had a question on the Peyton account." "Hey, no work talk tonight." Josh glared at him and grinned. "Right." Andrew walked over to get his food, taking Josh's advice for what to order. "Hey, Nate. Your fiancée has a great voice." Nate looked over in surprise. "Hey, Andrew. I haven't seen you here before." "It's my first time." "That would be why." Nate glanced back at the stage as the room went dark. "Ah, Allison's back on." Andrew sat next to Nate at the bar until his food was ready and then went back to sit next to Josh. The music lasted half an hour before she took another break. Andrew had finished his burger long before she completed her set. It was definitely one of the best burgers he'd had in a long time. Josh stood and stretched. "Ready to go?" "You're done already?" Andrew asked as he stood. "No, I want to try out this dance club." He pulled out a folded-up flyer from his pocket. "They just opened, and it's not too far from here." Andrew took the paper from him. "Disco? Really? Better than line dancing. Josh smirked. Hey, I've done plenty of line dancing in my day. Andrew dropped some cash on the table and laughed. Not that I enjoyed it. I lived in several places where it was almost a law that country had to be played for all school dances. Josh made a face. Wow. My condolences. They left the bar, waving at Nate as they went. It was a few blocks to the dance club. Music blasted through the speakers, and lights flashed when they walked inside. Several people were dressed in disco clothes, but the majority were dressed casually. Want to go out and dance first or find a table? Josh shouted over the music. Andrew didn't say anything as he walked over to the nearest empty table and sat. When it came to dancing, he preferred to be an observer. Josh sat in the chair next to him and leaned forward. The guy at the counter over there said they switch between music genres, so we won't be listening to disco all night. That's good to know. Andrew checked his phone. Past midnight. He was going to be exhausted at work the next day. I can only stay for a bit longer, he called out above the music. I have a half-hour drive ahead of me. We'll just stay long enough to give it a chance and then we can go. Josh nodded toward another table. You have someone's interest. Andrew followed his gaze to find a woman staring at him. She was beautiful, with sleek black hair and a brilliant red dress. Her smile told him she was used to getting what she wanted. The contrast between her and Kayla was evident, and Andrew knew who he preferred. It had been after 2 when Andrew got home the night before, and he was feeling it as he dragged himself into work the next morning. He poured a cup of coffee and headed for his cubicle. He loaded his laptop and checked his email, where he found a reminder of the party the next night and a receipt for the deposit to his account from the sale. This would help him buy the supplies needed to renovate his living room by Christmas. Even after that, he'd be able to put away a good chunk to save. By lunchtime, Andrew was ready to drop, and knew he'd better get up and walk around or he'd nod off during his meeting later. He stood and stretched before heading for the door. His favorite deli across the street was full of people waiting to get their lunches, and standing in a long line was the last thing he needed to help him stay awake. After a quick stop at a hot dog vendor, he walked down the street, trying to get himself to wake up. A small sign stood outside of a bookstore, causing people to weave around it. Andrew stopped, which made the man behind him curse and throw a dirty look over his shoulder as he moved past him. The jingle of the bell inside the bookstore announced Andrew's arrival. He took in a deep breath, filled with the smell of new and used books. The employees were busy with the Christmas rush, which was fine with Andrew. He could browse for a few minutes and then go back to work. He walked past the clearance rack to go find the classics, then stopped and backed up as a display caught his eye. The books were from Halloween and Thanksgiving, all marked 50 to 70% off. He picked up a few of the picture books, wondering if Ethan was too old for them by then. At least Evie and Noah would enjoy them, right? Under the pile of books, Andrew found one based on Sarah Josepha Hale. He chuckled at the coincidence as he picked it up and went through the pages. It was possible Kayla already had this, but Andrew wasn't about to let the opportunity slip by. He took the books up to the front and pulled out his wallet, gearing up for next Thanksgiving already, eh? The man smirked as he scanned each of them, something like that. Andrew paid and took the bag from the man. Thank you. The walk had taken a completely different turn from what he'd expected, but he was wide awake now, and couldn't wait to give the books to Kayla the next night. Andrew stepped out of the limo at Kayla's house and smoothed his suit coat. He walked up to the front door and paused before pushing the doorbell. He straightened his bow tie just as the door opened. Hey, Andrew. Kayla's sister Charlotte beamed. She'll be right down. Thank you. Evie poked her head around Charlotte's knee. Hey, Evie, he said. Evie giggled and darted away from the door. A crashing sound came from the other room, followed by shouts from the boys. Charlotte laughed and rolled her eyes. There goes the Lego tower. I'd better go help. Come on in. Andrew followed her into the living room where Legos were scattered all over the floor. Ethan and Noah yelled at Evie while she continued kicking the blocks. Wow, guys, what were you building? There's got to be a few thousand Legos here. Andrew shook his head. And he thought he'd had a lot when he was younger. Ethan wiped his eyes. We were building a big city, but then she had to come running through here. Sounds like you need to make it Evie-proof. Andrew scooted a few of the blocks together using his foot. Noah stared at him. Evie-proof? Charlotte knelt down next to Ethan. I think he means we need to build it stronger with more blocks for each building. You had it like this. She put together a building with just the walls. But what you really want is this. She then made another tower, filling in the middle with more blocks, like that, Andrew? Ethan asked. Yep, just like that. Andrew caught sight of Kayla on the stairs and walked back into the entryway. His breath caught in his throat. Kayla wore a long blue chiffon gown with a lace bodice that fit her curves just right. Her hair was pinned up, with soft curls falling around her face. Wow! You look beautiful. Kayla blushed and picked up the front hair of her dress so she could walk down the stairs. She took a wrap off the hook, and Andrew helped her put it on. Sorry about the fighting, Kayla said. They've been doing this all day. It's okay. I think we have it settled. Your sister is quite the engineer. Considering our dad owns a construction company, she should be. Kayla picked her purse up off the table and turned to her kids. You three be good for your aunt. Come give me a kiss. Ethan and Noah ran over, but Evie clung to Charlotte. Kayla kissed her daughter's cheek anyway and walked toward the door. Thanks, Charlotte. We'll be back in a few hours, Kayla said. You two behave yourselves. And be back by midnight, or you'll turn into a pumpkin. Bye, Charlotte. Kayla laughed as Andrew opened the door. He took her arm and leaned down toward her. You do realize we won't be back by then, right? It's an old family joke. That's what Dad said every time we. Kayla's eyes widened as she looked past him to the curb. You got a limo? I like to go in style, plus, Josh insisted on it. Andrew opened the door for her. Sounds like him. She climbed in, and he sat next to her. Josh sat across from them with Becca, the receptionist from Holt. Ah, there you are. Took you long enough, he said. We had a Lego emergency. Andrew scooted the gift bag under the seat, deciding to wait until later to give Kayla the books. Evie? Yep. Kayla, this is Becca. She works for Holt. Andrew gestured toward Becca. Kayla runs her own accounting business. Becca lit up. That's great. I minored in accounting in college. Andrew felt Kayla relax next to him and suppressed a smile. He figured knowing Becca was into accounting would help break the ice. I had a double major with journalism, but I decided to pursue accounting, Kayla said. Your dress is gorgeous, by the way. Becca smoothed out her pink gown. Thank you. I've had my eye on this for a while, so when Josh asked me yesterday, I was thrilled to finally have a reason to buy it. Kayla raised an eyebrow toward Josh, leaned in, and said, Still planning ahead, I see. Josh laughed. You know me. Andrew glanced around as they walked into the party. The banquet hall was exquisite. The owner of Silver Script, David Fleshman, knew how to throw huge parties for his employees, and this year was no different. He stood just inside the hall, welcoming everyone as they walked in. His wife, Lily, stood beside him, with Peter, his assistant, on the other side. Andrew put an arm around Kayla as he guided her forward to introduce her. He could sense the tension and leaned toward her. Don't stress. David is one of the most down-to-earth people I know, and his wife is even sweeter. She smiled gratefully. I just don't do this often. I'd rather be in sweats working at a desk in my own house. Tonight, you wouldn't know it. You're the most beautiful woman here. Andrew stepped forward to shake David's hand. Hey, this place is beautiful. Thank you. I'm pretty thrilled with it myself. Lily found it for me. He glanced over at Kayla. And this is? Kayla held out her hand. I'm Kayla Stiles. David glanced between Kayla and Josh, who stood behind them. As in, Josh Stiles? He's my brother. I see the resemblance. Your brother's campaign blew me away when I first saw it. Kayla turned to see Josh blushing. He's pretty amazing. Just don't let him know that. We don't need his head to get any bigger. Fair enough. Now, the tables have names on them, but you can ignore them and sit wherever you want if you'd like. Andrew laughed. We'll see you in there. They walked into the banquet room, and Andrew stared at the decor. Chandeliers hung every 20 feet or so, and the balcony that surrounded the room was decorated with holly and pine boughs. A large Christmas tree stood near the dais, packed with presents. Couples stood mingling around the floor, with a few people sitting at tables here and there. Andrew searched the cards on the tables to find his name, and sighed in relief when he saw that Josh and Becca were seated by them. So, should we go with what they decided, or rebel and sit on the other side of the room? Andrew waggled his eyebrows. Kayla set her purse down. This is fine, although I may change my mind later. It was another 10 minutes or so before David and Lily went up to sit on the dais with his assistant and top executives. People made their way to their spots and sat, waiting for dinner to start. David got up and spoke for a moment before announcing dinner would be served. Andrew leaned away so the waiter could set the salad in front of him. Kayla stared down at the plate in front of her. I'm not sure if I want to eat it or display it as a work of art, Andrew whispered to her. That's exactly what I was thinking, she whispered back. By the time dessert was served, Andrew was ready to pass out from being so full. As they sat and listened to David's remarks as he gave out the gifts, Andrew poked at the cheesecake in front of him. We have many great employees in this company, and it's always a tough decision when it comes to giving out this award. But for those who have worked with Andrew Weston, you can agree that he deserves the trophy for Top Employee of the Year. Andrew sat there stunned, wondering if he'd heard right. He stood to the clapping and whistling from those around him. How had this happened? He was sure Nate would get it after the shoe campaign he'd knocked out of the park earlier in the year, but Andrew's numbers had been more consistent. David grinned as he handed Andrew the trophy. Congratulations, Andrew. Thank you. Andrew stared at the trophy as he took his gift from Lily and walked back to his seat. The rest of the names being announced went by in a blur as Andrew tried to wrap his mind around the fact that he'd just won. You deserve it, you know, Josh whispered. I heard several others in the office say the same thing. Andrew smiled at him. Not sure I agree, but I appreciate it all the same. Thank you all for coming. The dancing will start soon. David sat back down next to Lily. Dance? I wasn't expecting to dance or I would have worn different shoes. Kayla cringed. Andrew shrugged. Just take the shoes off. Your dress is long enough that no one will notice, and I'll do my best not to step on your toes. Kayla hesitated before pulling off the blue heels. Normally I would be horrified at the thought, but my feet are killing me. Never buy heels the day before an event. I'll keep that in mind. Andrew stood up from the table. I'll take your purse and wrap to the coat room. I need to drop off my trophy there too. Thank you. She leaned forward so he could take the wrap off the back of her chair and then turned to Becca to talk. Andrew walked out into the hallway. The air was cooler than in the banquet room. A few other couples had the same idea, so he had to wait his turn to hand off his things. On his way back, a woman approached him with a glint in her eye. Andrew, right? Her black dress clung to her, and the dark makeup she wore made her seem out of place. Yes, and you are? She pulled a card out of her purse and gave it to him. I'm Maggie. I'm a reporter for the Times. I heard about the sale of your program, and I've been wanting to get an interview with you. I left messages a few times, but you never returned my calls. Sorry, I must have missed them. Andrew was pretty sure he hadn't gotten any messages from her. What would you like to know? How you came up with the idea? That sort of thing. We could talk right now, if you'd like. She pulled a tape recorder out of her purse. Andrew shook his head. My date is waiting for me. Maybe later? All right. We can talk Monday over coffee. Noon. At the cafe across from the agency. Her eyes darted toward the security guard walking down the hall, then she quickly left the building. The guard glared after her as he approached Andrew. Who was that? Some reporter. Andrew handed him the card she'd given him. Thanks. Mr. Fleshman was set on not allowing the press in here. I'm sure he'll be having a nice talk with her paper tomorrow. He slipped the card in his suit pocket. Andrew walked back into the banquet hall to find Kayla standing with Becca and Josh. She caught his gaze and smiled, then made her way over to him. I wondered where you were. Was the line long? A little, but I was trapped by a reporter. He gestured toward the dance floor. Would you like to dance? She slipped her arm through his. I would love to. He led her out onto the floor and wrapped his other arm around her waist. A light scent of lilac perfume wafted in the air around her. He breathed it in as he danced, enjoying the closeness. So what did the reporter want? Her voice pulled him out of his thoughts. She'd heard about the contract and wanted to interview me, which is odd. I didn't think it was public information. He twirled her around and pulled her close again. Kayla's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. That's strange. Why didn't they contact Josh? I don't know. Maybe she did. But that still doesn't explain how she knows about it. He watched Josh and Becca as they danced and laughed. He'd have to ask Josh if Maggie had contacted him too. Yeah, that shouldn't be common knowledge. It hasn't been officially announced. Kayla stepped back as the song ended. We can talk about it on the way home. Let's just enjoy ourselves right now. A slow song came on, so Andrew took her into his arms. I'm perfectly okay with that. As they swayed to the music, she rested her head on his shoulder and he stroked down her back. He didn't notice the other couples dancing around them because he was solely concentrating on her. When the song ended, she met his gaze, her blue eyes glistening in the dim light. He lowered his head and brushed his lips gently across hers. She hesitated before returning the kiss, both of her arms wrapping around his neck. When she pulled away, a smile played on her lips. They continued dancing for the next dance as well, not wanting to break the spell. When the song was over, Andrew kissed her once more. Would you like something to drink? Yes, I could use some water. Andrew laced his fingers through hers and they walked to the refreshment table for some water, casually watching the other dancers. Andrew squeezed Kayla's hand, still amazed that she seemed to return the feelings. When they announced the last song, Andrew set his cup on the tray next to him and led Kayla back out to the dance floor. She hummed to the music as they danced, making him chuckle. What? She asked. Nothing. I just take it you like this song. Her face reddened. Was I humming? Sorry. I'm so used to working alone that I find myself humming at random times. Andrew kissed her forehead. I think it's cute. I'm glad. Kayla smiled at him when the song ended, then she sat at the table to put her heels back on while Andrew went to get the coats. He caught sight of Maggie outside the building. Apparently, security hadn't done their jobs. He picked up their coats and went back into the ballroom, then made sure to leave by a different door so they wouldn't run into Maggie. He had to know if Josh had been contacted as well before he was willing to say anything else to her. They got out of the limo at Josh's apartment, where they switched cars, and then it was another half hour until Andrew and Kayla arrived at her house. When they climbed out, Andrew picked up the gift bag and kept it behind his back as they walked to the front door. "What's that?" Kayla peeked around his back toward the bag. "It's just something I found the other day that I thought you might like." He handed her the bag. Kayla pulled out the tissue and gasped when she saw the books inside. She pulled them out and grinned as she read the titles. When she came to the book about Sarah, her eyes filled with tears. "This is so sweet. Thank you. I didn't know if you already had a copy, but I wanted you to have it." She flipped through the pages. "I don't. Where did you find it?" "In a bookstore near work. I was surprised to find it, actually." She grinned up at Andrew. "I told you she was important." Andrew leaned down and kissed her. "I already knew she was important because she's your great-great whatever grandmother. Add a few more on there and it's about right." Kayla stared up at him, her eyes shining. "Thank you. Tonight was wonderful." "You're welcome." He paused. "Would you like to have dinner at my place tomorrow? You can bring the kids." "I'd love to, but my parents had to come into town for business and they're staying for dinner tomorrow night. You can come by if you'd like." She bit her lip, her eyes hopeful. Andrew nodded. "Sounds great. What time?" "We normally eat around 6, but you're welcome to come whenever. I have to meet with my pastor to give him a few things, and then I'll be over." As he drove toward home, he couldn't help feeling like he'd just left a little piece of himself back on the porch with Kayla. Chapter 7. Kayla woke up Sunday morning and stared up at the ceiling with a smile on her face. The book Andrew had given her sat on the bedside next to her. She rolled over to stare at the dress she'd worn the night before. The blue was definitely the right choice. She pushed out of bed and took a shower to get ready for church. Her parents would be there soon, and she needed to get the kids ready. Charlotte was sitting at the table in the kitchen when Kayla walked in to grab some breakfast. "I thought you would have gone by now." Kayla poured herself some coffee. "Just woke up. I'm heading out soon." "Oh, I won't be here for dinner tonight." Haley remembered she has a project due tomorrow, and of course we have none of the supplies we need for it. Kayla set her mug on the counter. "It's fine. And I appreciate you watching the kids last night. I needed the break." "How was the date?" "Perfect. Wonderful. Amazing. And don't give me the 'I told you so' look. I'm still trying to figure out how I let myself fall for him." Charlotte jumped up and pulled Kayla into a hug. "I knew he was perfect for you. And I'm so glad you gave him a chance." Charlotte grabbed her purse and keys. "I'd better go." Kayla waved and went to find her kids. The boys sat in their room playing with cars. Ethan was dressed in his church clothes, but Noah still wore pajamas. "Time for church. Hurry and get dressed." She waited long enough for Noah to hop up and go to his closet before finding Evie. She was still asleep, so Kayla picked out Evie's dress, then decided to do her own hair. It would be better for everyone if Evie got the sleep she needed. Kayla stood after the service and picked up Evie. It had been a nice sermon on the meaning of Christmas. Her mom had gone to talk to the preacher, but the kids were antsy to leave. "Hey, Dad. I'll meet you back at the house, okay? I'm not sure the church can handle much more of Evie today. I'll drag Mom away and see you in a few minutes." Dad kissed her cheek, then walked up to the front where her mom stood in line. Ethan and Noah raced out to the car while Evie tried to catch up. Small flakes of snow fell from the sky, and Kayla hoped it wouldn't get worse. She wanted the kids to get to know Andrew better, but if the weather was bad enough, he wouldn't be able to come. The thought of not being able to see him that day brought a disappointment that surprised her. She drove the few blocks to her house and hurried inside to change. The aroma from the roast she'd put in the oven earlier that morning greeted her as she opened the door. If her parents and Andrew didn't get there soon, she'd eat the whole thing herself. "Mommy, you need to see the Lego city we built with Aunt Charlotte. It's big and it's EV-proof." Noah tugged on Kayla's hand. "Okay, but then we need to put it away because Grandma and Grandpa are coming." Kayla let him push her into the living room, where he dropped in front of a small city. "See? We made the building strong and Evie tried to break it, but she couldn't." Noah picked up one of the buildings and dropped it. Two pieces fell off, but otherwise, the tower stayed together. "See?" Kayla ruffled his hair. "You did a great job. You'll have to show Grandpa." Noah's eyes lit up. "I don't have to put them away and hide that amazing architecture? That would be sad." Kayla left him there and went to change so she could have everything ready for dinner. The doorbell rang, and a few seconds later, Kayla heard voices. "They're early." She pulled her hair up and went to meet them. To her surprise, it was Andrew who stood in the doorway, with a bread basket. "Hey, I brought some rolls. I hope that's okay." "Wow, these smell delicious." "Thank you. I was just about to pull some from the freezer, and now I don't have to." She took the basket and went to the kitchen. "You can come in and keep me company while I finish getting everything ready. My parents aren't here yet." She set the rolls down and turned to find Andrew standing right next to her. Butterflies quivered in her stomach. Last night had felt like a dream, but she could tell by the tenderness in his eyes, it had definitely happened. Andrew leaned forward, but paused. "Are your kids going to care?" I don't know." She cleared her throat. "I haven't had a chance to talk to them about us being together yet." "Ah." Andrew kissed her on the cheek, then backed up and leaned against the counter. "What can I help with?" Kayla wanted nothing more than to have him wrap his arms around her, but she turned and pulled the roast out of the oven. "Let's see. We need to set the table, or you can carve the roast. Or you can go into the living room and play with the kids. Where are the knives?" "I can do the roast." Kayla found a cutting board and knife, then pulled out a platter from the cupboard to set it on. While he cut the meat, she spooned out the roasted vegetables into a dish and put it on the table. The doorbell rang, so she washed her hands and turned to leave the room, but saw Andrew standing there. She hadn't said anything to them about dating him, but it was going to come out that he winked at her. "It'll be okay. I know." She took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway to find her parents hugging the boys. "Hey, Mom and Dad. How was the trip?" "Not bad, although traffic was a little crazy from our hotel to your house." Her dad pulled off his coat and hung it on the rack next to the door. A crash came from the other room, so Ethan and Noah ran back to see what Evie had done. "I wish you would just stay here. I'm not that far out of the city, and I could have made you breakfast." Kayla took her mom's coat and hung it next to her dad's. Her mom waved away her concern. "We don't like putting you out. Besides, Dad's meeting is early in the morning, and we wanted to get back home as soon as we could once it's over. Still, I know the kids would have loved it. Anyway, Andrew is just finishing up the meat, and then we'll be ready to eat," Kayla said. She bit her lip when she realized what she'd just said. She'd planned to wait a little longer to announce that he was here. Her mom's eyebrows shot up. "Andrew? What is he, are you? What do the kids think?" Kayla could feel her face burning. "They don't know yet. We were going to talk about it at dinner." "That's so wonderful. I knew I liked him." Her mom rushed into the kitchen. "Why, Andrew, it's so good to see you again." "Hello, Mrs. Stiles." He wiped his hands and picked up the tray. "The roast is ready." Kayla took it from him and headed for the dining room. She set it on the table and saw Josh standing in the doorway taking off his coat. She couldn't help the relief she felt at seeing him. This way, it wouldn't seem so strange that Andrew was here. Oh, there you are. I thought you'd gotten lost. She leaned close to him and whispered, Andrew's here, and I don't know what to tell Mom and Dad. Pretty sure they've already figured out what's going on. Josh scooped up Noah, who squealed with laughter. Is dinner ready? I'm starving. You have impeccable timing, as always. Kayla walked in to find that her mom had already dished food onto the plates. She watched as Andrew interacted with her parents, thrilled that they all got along so well. She just hoped her kids were really okay with her dating him. Josh sat next to Ethan and let Kayla and Andrew sit next to each other. We were just deciding who should say grace, and it seems you're it. Dad smiled at him and bowed his head. Kayla stood at the sink rinsing dishes when Andrew came up behind her and kissed her on the cheek. She smiled up at him and set the plate in the dishwasher. Hey. I just wanted to get a few of these done while people finished eating. I can help. Andrew pushed up his sleeves before grabbing a rag. Dinner was really good, by the way. Thanks. Your rolls added to it. I'll tell the grocer the next time I'm in the store. His laugh rolled over her, making her stomach flutter. Knowing her parents were in the other room made her even more nervous. Kayla dried her hands. Come on. I should probably join my parents before they have to leave. They did wonder where you were. His eyes danced as he grinned and took the towel from her. And you didn't tell me? Kayla nudged his shoulder. He shrugged and pulled her into his arms. I just wanted you to myself for a moment. She pushed away her own warning about keeping this from her kids until she could talk to them and just enjoyed being so close to him. Yes, I did. He tipped her chin up and kissed her lightly. Kayla stood dazed for a moment as she stared into his eyes. What were we supposed to be doing again? He kissed her nose and went to the freezer. Josh told me to search the freezer for ice cream. No ice cream this time. But I do have brownies near the stove. She reached for some small plates in the cupboard and took them out to the dining room. Andrew grabbed the brownies. We were just about to send a search party. Mom laughed. Dinner was wonderful, Kayla. Was that Grandma's recipe? Of course. No one makes a better roast. She set the plates down, and Andrew put the brownies next to them. She cut a piece for each of them. Sorry for the lack of ice cream, Josh. It slipped my mind at the store. Josh stopped mid-bite. I'll forgive you this time. But only if I get another brownie. Kayla laughed and served him another one. As long as it was sugar, Josh was willing to take just about anything. Did you tell Mom and Dad about your contract? He did. We're so thrilled for him. And for Andrew. Mom beamed. We always hoped his video game playing would add up to something. Josh snorted. They're not really related, but we'll go with that. Dad pushed away from the table. We would love to stay longer, but we need to get back to the hotel. Dinner was lovely, Kayla. She hopped up to give them a hug, then walked them to the door. As nervous as she was to have them there with Andrew, she hated to see them go so soon. Thanks for coming. Be safe. And enjoy your meeting tomorrow. As much as you can at these things. Dad zipped up his jacket and opened the door for Mom before following her out. Kayla went back to the table with Josh and Andrew. The kids had run off to play, which meant Evie was probably getting chocolate on whatever toy she was playing with at the time. And you've never seen her before? Josh asked. No, and the security guard wasn't thrilled she was there. I saw her around again not long after that. Andrew frowned. Maybe I'll just skip it, then. I don't like it that she didn't contact you too. You'd think she'd want us both. I mean, we're partners, and you're the one who came up with the idea in the first place. Josh shook his head. I think you should just go to the interview. Maybe she didn't realize I was part of it. And besides, this would be great publicity for the company. If I can get out of the meeting with the shoe company, I can head over there with you. That could work. I just don't understand why she wants to hear about it. People make these huge sales all the time. Who knows what drives stories? Josh stood. I think I need to head home. Maybe you should too, Andrew. Santa needs plenty of rest before the big day. You only have a couple of weeks left. Andrew's face turned red. You just had to bring it up, didn't you? What kind of friend would I be if I didn't? Night. Josh left the house laughing. Kayla turned to Andrew. What was he talking about? Andrew nodded toward the kids who were playing a few feet away. I'll tell you later. Okay. Hey, Ethan. You three need to get ready for bed. You have school tomorrow. Put your pajamas on, and I'll read you a story. Can Ginger sleep in my room tonight? Only if you promise to go right to sleep. Ethan jumped up with a whoop. I will. Kayla turned back to Andrew as she picked up Evie. You're welcome to stay if you'd like, sure. I can't resist story time. Andrew stood and began to clear the table. I'll go finish the dishes while you get them ready. Kayla took Evie upstairs and changed her, then made sure Noah had his pajamas on. She had to jump out of the way as Ginger went scrambling past her. Andrew knocked on the door to the bedroom and came in to sit next to Kayla. He didn't say anything, but his presence unnerved her. He'd stepped into a moment that was usually shared just between her and the kids. Once the boys settled down in their beds and Evie sat on her lap, she read them a Christmas story. When she finished, Andrew picked up the children's books he bought and held one up. Who wants a Thanksgiving story next? The kids cheered. Kayla listened as Andrew read the story, adding voices and actions as he told it. She was pulled in and laughed along with the rest of them as he made faces. It warmed her heart to see how good he was with the kids, and how much they seemed to enjoy spending time with him. When the story was over, they begged for him to read another one. No, it's time for bed. Maybe next time Andrew's here. Kayla took Evie into her room and kissed her goodnight before putting up the baby gate so she wouldn't escape. Then she kissed the boys and turned on some music to help them fall asleep. Kayla paused just before walking into the living room. It was just the two of them now, and she wasn't sure what to do with herself. This was the first time she'd really been alone with him since the party. Even while they were in the kitchen, she'd known the kids were just in the other room. She sat down on the couch and he sat next to her, pulling her close. Your family is incredible. I hope you know that. She rested her head on his shoulder, allowing herself to relax. Thank you. I don't just mean your parents. Your kids are too. He ran his hand down her arm, sending a thrill through her. She sat up so she could face him. It was suddenly too much, and she wanted to lighten the mood. You're just trying to butter me up so I won't ask about the Santa remark. Andrew grinned. Maybe. But I meant every word I said. Spill. It's nothing, really. I was Santa for our Christmas party at church, and Josh thinks that's the most hilarious thing ever. Kayla's jaw dropped. That is awesome. Please tell me you have pictures. Yeah, but you can't show Josh or I'll never live it down. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. Here we go. Kayla settled back into his arms and took the phone from him. The pictures showed him as Santa, with someone dressed as an elf next to him. Other pictures showed children glancing up at him with huge smiles on their faces. Her heart melted when she saw him holding a tiny baby in his arms, grinning at the camera. These pictures are pretty much the best things I've ever seen. Again, don't let Josh know you've seen evidence or it'll end up plastered all over the office. I can believe that. Kayla turned and stared up into his eyes, which were just inches from hers. You know he admires you, right? Helping him out with that program meant a lot. I can tell. Andrew squeezed her shoulders. I know. And he's been a good friend. Besides, he did most of the work, I just tweaked a few things. He could have sold it without me. Kayla kissed him, and he shifted so she could be closer to him. The kiss grew more intense, and Kayla allowed herself to give in to the hunger for it. Mommy, a small voice called, shadowing the moment. Kayla tore herself away from Andrew, trying to clear her head. Coming. She glanced back at Andrew. I'd better go up there. I'll see you soon. Andrew stood and grabbed his coat. I'll call tomorrow. I look forward to it. Kayla watched as he walked down the sidewalk to his car before turning to run upstairs. Evie stood at her gate, rubbing her eyes. Mommy, I'm thirsty. Just a sec. Kayla went downstairs to grab a sippy cup from the fridge, then ran back upstairs to give it to Evie, hoping it was all she needed. She went to her room and got ready for bed. Mommy? Kayla closed her eyes, knowing it was going to be one of those nights. She stepped over the gate and sat in the rocking chair so Evie could climb up onto her lap. Kayla hummed a lullaby as they rocked, waiting for Evie to fall asleep. Thoughts of the evening ran through her head, and she couldn't help smiling to herself. This had been the perfect day, and she hoped Andrew felt the same. Chapter 8. Andrew stared at the card in his hand, wondering for the 100th time if he should be sitting there waiting for Maggie. Josh had been pulled into another meeting at the last minute, and Andrew didn't feel right talking about the project without him. Maybe they could reschedule. The bell over the door jingled, announcing Maggie's arrival. She surveyed the deli before smiling and striding over to him. Thanks for meeting with me. People love to hear success stories of entrepreneurs and how they started their multi-million-dollar businesses. Wait, we're not starting a business. We both still work for Silver Script Ad Agency and plan to stay there. Maggie narrowed her eyes as she wrote something in her notebook. I see. So this is just a side project, then? Yes, it's something Josh has worked on for years. Andrew watched as she took more notes. That's great. So, how did you two meet? And was your friendship formed over this project? No, we were roommates first. I graduated and came to Silver Script, and I was pretty surprised when I saw him at work this last summer. We hadn't talked since I left California a couple of years ago. Did he know you were a computer programmer? Andrew frowned. We were roommates, so of course he knew I could work with computers. All right, so rumor has it that you're dating his sister. Did that come before or after you two started working on this program? After, but what does it? How did you meet her? Was it at the Christmas party? You two seemed pretty cozy there. She smiled, but without any warmth in her eyes. Look, Josh didn't think it was cool that I don't celebrate Thanksgiving, and it's a pretty huge deal for his family, so he invited me to dinner. That's where I met her. He closed his eyes, cursing himself for flying off the handle. He shouldn't have told her any of that. Take that off the record. It has nothing to do with the contract, and I only have a few minutes left of my lunch break. Either talk more about the sale, or I'm leaving right now. Maggie held up a hand. Calm down. This isn't going to be part of the article, I'm just curious. So, tell me a little more about how this program works. Can anyone get it? Andrew released the breath he'd been holding. Now this was something he could answer without feeling like he was selling his soul. No, this is more for large corporations like Holt who need to know current trends in sales so they know where to concentrate their marketing. They own the rights, so unless they decide to sell it to other corporations, it will remain their product. She wrote a few more notes before closing her notebook. Thanks. The article will post tomorrow, as long as I can get it to my editor by the deadline. I appreciate your time. And just remember who gave you your first exclusive interview. Andrew forced himself not to roll his eyes as he shook her hand. He took a step to leave, but turned back. Just out of curiosity, why didn't you contact Josh? He hadn't heard anything about this interview until I mentioned it. Maggie moved closer, her face just inches from his. He's not my type. I wanted to get to know you a little better. She reached up and kissed him before walking away, laughing to herself. Andrew wiped his mouth in disgust and scowled as she left the deli. He should never have kept this appointment. Andrew could barely concentrate on his work after lunch. He should have snatched the notebook out of her hands and burned her notes. Hey, how'd it go? Josh stood at the door of Andrew's cubicle. It was a mess, but hopefully she'll make it sound all right. How was your meeting? Andrew's head pounded. Josh grinned. They loved it, and I managed to score the top spot for the Super Bowl. Of course, that probably has more to do with their product than anything I did, but I'll take it. That's fantastic, except that I was trying to get the spot too. Guess I'll just deal with the second spot. Guess so. Josh glanced at his watch. I'd better get going. Becca wants me to go Christmas shopping with her. Andrew raised an eyebrow. That's serious, huh? No, she has a brother my age and wants my opinion for his gift. Which is fine because I need her to help me pick something out for my sisters. See ya. He left, but came back a second later. By the way, Kayla showed me the book you got her. You couldn't have found a better gift. Maybe I should take you with me instead. Andrew laughed. I think it's better to trust Becca. I got lucky with that book. Yes, you did. He left the cubicle, and Andrew forced himself to pay attention to the layout he'd been working on. Once he was satisfied with how everything looked, he sent it on to his boss, Deborah, for the okay. He answered a few emails, then shut down for the day. He wanted to work on the living room that night so the house would be in good shape so he could invite Kayla to bring her kids over. Right now it was a construction zone, and he'd seen what Evie could do in a child-proofed house. He left his office and called the lumber guy to make sure the order had been delivered, then called another contractor to make sure they'd sent the paint and trim over. Work had gotten in the way for too long, and he couldn't wait to get back to refurbishing his home. Andrew stepped back and set his roller in the drip pan. The forest green paint was dark and rich, perfect for the room. Maybe it was too much of a bachelor color, but it was definitely better than the flower wallpaper that had covered the walls before. He took the pan and roller into the sink to rinse them out so he could try to sleep before work the next morning. The trim had taken longer than he'd wanted it to, which threw everything else off, but he was thrilled with the outcome. He could declare this room done as soon as the tape came off and he had the furniture in. The kitchen would come next, but he needed to get another load of supplies before that happened. A thump came at the door, announcing the morning paper. Andrew glanced over at the clock to find that it was nearly 5 in the morning. He'd stayed up longer than he thought. He opened the door and picked up the paper, then went into his room and dropped it on the side table next to his bed. Just a couple of hours of sleep, and he would need to head into work. The couple of hours turned into 8 as Andrew jolted out of sleep. His alarm hadn't gone off, and the exhaustion from working all night had caught up to him. He took just enough time to shower and grab coffee before running out the door. After another 2 trips into the house to grab his keys and laptop, he decided just to drive to work instead of trying to find a taxi. Traffic was crazy with the weather and Christmas crowd, so lunch was already over when Andrew finally got to the office. He walked quickly, smiling or nodding at people as he passed, until he noticed the glares or icy stares that were returned. What was going on? He dropped his stuff off and went to find Josh at his cubicle. Hey, how did the shopping go last night? The hurt and anger on Josh's face made Andrew take a step back. It was fine. Josh paused for a moment, but then continued typing. I'm surprised that you're talking to me. What with my overwhelming greed and annoying need to walk in your footsteps. Andrew stared at him in shock. Josh had never talked to him like that before. What are you talking about? Nate walked by and dropped a newspaper in Andrew's hand. Andrew's heart sank when he realized it was the paper Maggie worked for. He walked back to his desk and riffled through the paper until he found what he was looking for. Pictures were plastered across the business section of the paper. Andrew with Kayla, Andrew with Josh, pictures that Maggie shouldn't have been able to get her hands on. Every word of the article was filled with fabricated stories of how he'd met Josh, how his programming skills were good enough that Josh had followed him to New York so he could use them to his advantage, how Andrew had been tricked into a dinner with a crazy family who was way too obsessed with the holiday their ancestor had begun, and it continued from there. By the time Andrew got to the part where Kayla had somehow weaseled her way into his heart, he was ready to punch something. Andrew crumpled up the newspaper and threw it into the trash. His hands shook with anger as he walked back to Josh's cubicle. Josh, no, Josh pushed his chair out and turned to face Andrew. Just don't. I don't know what we did to deserve that, but I don't understand why you would say those things. I didn't. That woman, Josh jumped from his chair, his hands clenched in fists. I could excuse a few mistakes in numbers or how long we've worked together, but this goes down to details that could only have come from you. So excuse me for not believing you. Andrew stumbled toward his cubicle and grabbed his jacket. He needed to get out of the office. He needed to find Kayla and explain what happened. But first, he was going to make sure Maggie never typed another story like that ever again. Chapter 9. The book from Andrew sat next to the newspaper that had spouted so much venom. Kayla's eyes drifted to them as she did her best to concentrate on the ledgers sitting in front of her. How could he? The rational side of her kept trying to tell her that something wasn't right, that he would never say anything like that. But the evidence sat right in front of her. For someone to think that she'd gone after him to further Josh's career was ludicrous. Josh was brilliant, always had been, and he didn't need someone to help him get any job. Kayla's phone rang yet again, but she refused to answer it. Andrew's pleas and his voicemail messages tugged at her shattered heart, but he needed to know that she needed time. Even if the whole thing had been fabricated, it still stung. She'd already received a few messages from her friends and neighbors, accusing her of hurting the poor boy. That poor boy should never have talked to that reporter, and that's what made her the most upset. He'd admitted that he didn't feel comfortable around her. Mommy? I'm hungry. Evie stood at the doorway of Kayla's home office. Kayla pushed away from her desk and stood, thankful for the distraction. She'd just be the mom her kids needed and shut everything else out. They were who really mattered anyway. Evie ran shrieking into the kitchen, pretending to be an airplane. Noah would be home from school soon, so Kayla made a pot of mac and cheese for the two kids and watched as Evie shoveled it into her mouth. The phone rang, but Kayla let it go to voicemail. She didn't need to hear another person lecturing her. If it was a customer, they would have called her office number, and it was the time she normally took a lunch anyway. Hey, sweetie, should we go see pretty Christmas lights tonight? She needed to get out of the house. Lights. I like lights. Evie grabbed a handful of noodles and shoved them into her mouth. All done. Let's go. Kayla shook her head and went to the sink to get a washcloth. Maybe she should have waited until after Evie was done before asking her. It needs to be dark first, sweetie. We'll go after Ethan's game tonight. Evie stuck out her bottom lip for a moment, but then brightened. Uncle Josh coming? I don't think so. I can ask, but he might be busy. Kayla pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. Oh, I think I hear the bus. Noah's home. Evie jumped off her chair and ran for the front window. She pressed her face up against the glass until the bus pulled up in front of the house. Noah. Kayla had to stop her from running out of the house in her princess dress and bare feet. Whoa, there. You need boots and coat first. By the time her boots were on, Noah was at the front door. Kayla sighed when she saw that Evie was on the verge of tears. Why don't you two go out and play with Ginger in the backyard? She's lonely. Kayla helped Evie with her coat. The weather was mild for December, and once Ethan got home, they'd have to leave for his game. The kids cheered and ran out the back door, calling for Ginger. Kayla took her laptop and paperwork into the kitchen where she could watch them from the window and went back to fixing the ledger in front of her. Kayla's phone buzzed with a text from Josh. I'll be there. You don't mind if I bring Becca, do you? That's fine. You two seem to be getting serious. There was a slight pause before he answered back. Yeah. You okay? Kayla didn't answer for a moment. What was she supposed to say? She was hurt, betrayed, and confused. This didn't seem like the guy she'd spent time with over the last few weeks. I don't know. Does this seem like him to you? No. But the lady knew way too much about us. He couldn't exactly deny that. Maybe he hadn't seen it yet. See you at the game. It's at the same place at 5:30. Kayla set her phone aside and finished the ledger, then sent it back to her client. A few other clients had emailed with the information she needed, so she finished those before closing her laptop. The phone rang, and Andrew's face appeared on her screen. She debated answering it. Evie and Noah were taking turns jumping into the pile of leaves in the backyard, so she knew they'd be busy for a bit longer. Hello? There was a sigh of relief before Andrew began speaking. I'm so sorry. I had no idea that woman would say any of those things. You must have said something that would make her write those things. I didn't come after you. I know. I never said you did. Your family has been nothing but good to me since I went to your parents' house. Everything she said was completely twisted. Kayla closed her eyes, letting a tear roll down her cheek. You said my family was a bunch of crazy people who were stuck in the past, praising the ground my ancestor walked on. Come on, Kayla. You know I would never say something like that. Why would I have bought you that book if I felt that way? Andrew's voice seemed to carry the same pain Kayla felt in her heart. Why was that even brought up at all? It had nothing to do with your computer program. My name should have never even come into the conversation. She kept mentioning your family. I tried to stay on topic. When she tried to lead the conversation to make it seem like Josh was using me, I had to turn it around. Look, can I see you? I want to try to work this out, and I feel like the phone isn't the best way to do that. Kayla stared out at her kids playing. She ached to see him again, even with this whole mess between them, but it would probably only make things worse. I don't think, please. You can have Josh or your parents or whoever be there too if that's what you need. I just want to talk it out. Fine. Ethan has a game tonight, and Josh is coming. We can talk after that. The game is at the same place as last time. Kayla pushed the end button before he responded and dropped her phone on the table. She had to be crazy, but she wanted to give him a real chance to explain. She just hoped her heart could handle it. Kayla waved to Josh as soon as she saw him come into the building. Evie held out her arms so he could pick her up. Becca gave a shy smile as she sat next to Kayla in the bleachers. Thanks for letting me come. I love soccer, so when I found out your son was playing, I wanted to watch. She pulled off her gloves and coat. So, which one is he? He's on the blue team. Number 21. Kayla pointed him out on the field. I'm glad you could come. Are you ready for Christmas? Mostly. Josh helped me yesterday. She leaned closer. I could use some help finding something for him, though. Kayla thought for a moment. He loves computer gadgets, but he also loves sports. Get anything soccer or basketball, and he'll be thrilled to death. Good to know. Thanks. The game started, and instead of making Josh chase Evie around, Kayla held her and let her play games on the phone. It was about halftime when Kayla looked over and froze. Andrew had shown up at the game. She hadn't actually expected him to come. "Hey, Josh. I thought I had more time to warn you." She nodded toward the entrance. Josh turned, his face hardening. "You invited him?" "To talk. I want to hear him out. If he gives any indication of being a slime ball like the article made him out to be, I'll kick him out." Josh clenched his teeth. "Fine." Andrew came over, his complexion almost pale. He tried to smile at Josh, but faltered when he got nothing but a stony look back. He turned to leave, but Kayla jumped up, setting Evie on Josh's lap. "I told you to give him a chance," she shot at Josh, then ran down the bleachers. "Wait, Andrew." By the time she caught up, he was almost out the door. She followed him outside, wondering what she was doing standing there. She watched him as he shifted from one foot to the other, and almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He wouldn't meet her eye, not that she could blame him. "I'm surprised you actually came." She forced the words out, wanting to get the conversation over as soon as possible. "I'm sorry. I'll just go home and we can talk later." He tried to push past her, but Kayla held on to his arm. "Hey, I'm the one who has every right to be upset right now. That article said some pretty nasty things about my family." Her voice was harsher than she'd wanted, but she couldn't believe he was acting like this. Andrew stared down at his feet. "I didn't say those things. I didn't come close." I don't know how she got any of that information. She asked questions that she shouldn't have even known to ask. When I asked her why she didn't contact Josh, she said, he shuddered. She said he wasn't her type, and then she kissed me. Kayla's jaw dropped. "She kissed you? And you let her?" "Of course I didn't let her. It disgusted me." She walked away before I could say anything. "But you have to understand, I would never have said any of those things. Ever. I'd really like to believe that." Kayla rubbed her temples. "Did you know her?" Andrew shook his head. "I've never seen her before in my life. As far as I know, she's not affiliated with anyone I could have offended. None of it makes sense. I'm sorry." Kayla could see from his eyes that he meant what he said. And she almost believed him, but what had been said still hurt. "It's going to take some time for me to get over this. I've been sent some pretty nasty texts and emails all day, and a sorry isn't going to make it go away." "You have?" His face hardened. "I want to see them." "No one has the right to do that to you. It doesn't matter what they said. It's already done. And I think, until you figure out how to fix it and get that woman to rescind this article, we're just going to have to stay apart." Her voice caught as she said the last word. "Bye, Andrew," she whispered as she turned and walked away, wiping a tear that had escaped. He'd been exactly what she needed to get over Mike, but then this whole mess happened. Trust was hard won, and after what Mike had done, she couldn't believe she'd fallen for another guy who would destroy her faith yet again. Kayla wiped her eyes and headed back to the bleachers where Josh sat. She wanted to tell him what Andrew had said, but knew she needed to wait a little longer. Right now, Josh obviously wanted nothing to do with Andrew. He had more to lose than Andrew with this whole thing. They'd been friends for years, and now their integrity was being questioned. Evie still sat on Josh's lap when Kayla got back. Noah watched the game next to him, and Ethan was out on the field. Becca jumped up and cheered as Ethan's team scored. At least someone was enjoying themselves. What did I miss? Kayla took Evie back. Ethan scored a goal. Some kid got a yellow card for knocking another player to the ground. The usual. Josh's usually cheerful face was somber. "So, did you kiss and make up?" Kayla pulled a snack out for Evie before answering. "No. I told him he'd better make things right. I'm not mad. I don't know that I believe he could have said anything like what that woman reporter wrote." It's not like him. But that article is still causing damage. Oh, and the craziest part? She kissed him after the interview. What kind of unprofessional dirt bag reporter does something like that? Someone like her. I wish I could have skipped my meeting to go to the interview. Maybe I could have stopped this from happening. Josh glanced over at Kayla. I assume you've gotten the same texts I have. Yep. You don't think people sent them to mom and dad, do you? The game ended, so Kayla stood and put Evie's coat on her. Josh cursed under his breath. I hadn't even thought of that. If they did, I'll go after her myself. We could, you know. Libel, defamation, all kinds of suits would work. But it's not worth it. Andrew will take care of it. At least, he'd better if he knows what's good for him. Kayla walked down the bleachers to greet Ethan. Hey, buddy. You did great out there. That goal was the coolest thing ever. I kicked it right past the goalie. He couldn't even get to it. Josh grabbed him in a hug. Best soccer playing I've ever seen. Right, Becca? I have to agree. She held her hand out to Ethan so he could give her a high five. Ethan glanced up at Kayla. It's okay. She's Josh's friend Becca. Oh. He gave her a high five. Can we go get ice cream? Sure, buddy. Kayla looked down when Evie tugged on her coat. Pretty lights? She stuck out her bottom lip. Kayla closed her eyes. She'd forgotten about the lights, what with the whole Andrew mess. How about instead of ice cream, we go see Christmas lights, and then go home for some hot chocolate? Ethan thought about it for a moment before he nodded. That sounds fun. And can we finally get our tree? Yes, we can. Kayla chuckled as they walked out to the car. Ethan hadn't let her live it down since the night they got back from her parents. Josh and Becca, you're welcome to come with us if you'd like. We'd love to, but Becca has tickets to a Broadway play tonight. Josh put his arm around her. But thanks for the invite. You're welcome. Kayla climbed into her car and drove to their favorite decorated house in Pelham Gardens. She had to credit Mike for this. He was huge into Christmas and would drive hours just to find the best lights. She'd wanted to skip it the year after he left, but Ethan wouldn't let her. Kayla made sure their coats were done up, then took Evie's hand. As they walked through the hundreds of displays, Kayla enjoyed listening to the oohs and ahs from her kids. When they finished, they climbed back in the car. Okay, we can either try to hit more lights, or we can go find a Christmas tree and make hot chocolate. Tree! Evie yelled, and the others chimed in. Good answer. Kayla pulled out and drove to the nearest tree lot, hoping they had a good selection. It was dark outside, which meant Evie would most likely fall asleep on the drive, and Kayla didn't want her to miss out on finding the tree. There were several cars parked by the lot, which she hoped was a good sign. She stopped and opened the door to get Evie out, wishing she had remembered the stroller. Look, Mommy, I like that one. Noah pointed to a large tree in the corner. Let's wait until we're at least inside before you choose, okay? The worry faded away from Kayla's mind as she stepped into the lot. So many memories from her family had been created looking for the perfect tree. They'd once made an unsuccessful attempt to go find one in the mountains when she was a young girl and had gone for a commercial tree ever since then. The smell of the pine mixed with the crisp bite to the air was intoxicating. Kayla enjoyed listening to the excited voices from the other families as they all picked out their favorite trees. Kayla crouched down to where she could meet Ethan and Noah's eyes. Okay, here's the deal. You need to find something under 8 feet tall or it won't fit in our house. I'd prefer something closer to 6 or 7. Think you can do that? So we can't have the tree back there? Noah frowned. I wish, but it won't fit. But hey, look over here. Kayla went to a corner where a Douglas fir sat. It was the kind her dad loved. Isn't it perfect? Noah circled it. It's too big. We need something skinnier to fit in our living room. They listen to their dad too much. She sighed. Okay, which one do you like? Ethan pointed to a blue spruce tree nearby. I like that one. And it says 7 feet. That's okay, right? Kayla checked the price. It wasn't too bad. And if she couldn't have her fur, this was definitely a good alternative. How about you two? Do you like it? It's pretty. Evie tried to hug it, but a branch tickled her face. I want this one. What about you, Noah? Is this a good one? Kayla crossed her fingers, hoping he'd agree. She was freezing, and Evie's cheeks were red. He nodded. It's perfect. I agree. Kayla sighed with relief and waved to one of the workers to let them know she'd take it. She waited for him to come over and pulled out her wallet to pay. While he secured it to the top of the car, she got the kids locked into their car seats. Ready to go home and make some hot chocolate? Kayla pulled out onto the road to the sound of cheering from the back seat. Chapter 10. Andrew pounded in the nail a little harder than needed. He'd tried to contact the newspaper several times, but they weren't returning calls or replying to his emails. Maggie had supposedly taken a vacation, according to her voicemail greeting, but he didn't believe that for a second. People at work had turned on him, and while Josh was civil, he wasn't willing to hang out. Not that Andrew could blame him. The article had trended on social media for the last few days, and he'd been contacted by a few other news stations. He'd politely declined the interviews, but he was beginning to wonder if he was going about it all wrong. The thought of calling Maggie and the paper out had gone through his mind, but he didn't want to hurt any connections he had through his agency. He took another nail and made sure the board was level before attaching it. The wainscoting in the kitchen was farther along than he'd expected by that time, but he pretty much slept, went to work, and remodeled. The phone rang, but he let it go to voicemail. It was most likely another station that he wanted to ignore. But when the phone rang immediately after and then again after that, he finally picked it up, surprised to see his mom's number. Hey, Mom, what's up? He set the hammer down and went to find a drink in the fridge. This could take a while. What's up? Why haven't I heard from you? And Val told me she's tried to call you as well. I was beginning to wonder if that terrible family had done you in or something. Terrible family? Oh. Andrew's face fell. I'm fine, Mom. And they're not terrible. The news just lies. What do you mean? Andrew explained everything that had happened, pausing between her gasps to answer the million questions she had. So what are you going to do? You can't just let that woman get away with this. Her worry had turned to anger. I don't know what else to do. No one is answering my calls. Josh won't talk to me. Kayla basically told me she would only forgive me once I have it taken care of, and I worry that any other news station would just take things further. Andrew dropped into a chair and rubbed his forehead. He'd been able to push away everything while he worked, but it all came back full force as he talked. There's always a letter to the editor. Andrew shook his head, even though his mom couldn't see him. I'd thought of that, but there's no way they'd print it. Not there. At one of the other papers in New York, maybe? Surely you have some connections with one of them. I usually work with television and magazines. Besides, there's a reason I stick with pictures and witty slogans. Writing a heartfelt letter is not my forte. I know because I've tried several times over the last few days. Mom chuckled. You'll figure it out. I have faith in you. But that's not why I called. We want to know what your Christmas plans are. I don't know. I'd hoped to let you meet Kayla, but it doesn't look like that'll happen. Are you and Dad having everyone at home? Mom cleared her throat. Actually, no. We're going to be up north this year. Your dad's company is having a huge Christmas party in Manhattan, and we thought it would be fun to spend the weekend at your house. Andrew stared at the unfinished kitchen and grimaced. I'm kind of in the middle of tearing out the kitchen. Aren't Val or Haley coming to visit? Val's spending Christmas with her in-laws, and Haley is heading off to Europe with a few of her college friends. Oh, please, Andrew. Let us come up. It would be nice to see them, and he wasn't sure he would have been able to make it to South Carolina for Christmas. Fine. I just can't promise that we'll have running water by then. She laughed. You're just like your dad, aren't you? Andrew smiled. Yes, I am. Love you, Mom. See you in a couple of weeks. Andrew chewed on his lip as he watched the cameraman zoom in on the computer screen. They'd been shooting all day, and things hadn't gone quite the way he'd hoped. They were making the announcement that Josh's program would be going public, and he needed it to be perfect. Okay, now, stay right there. Andrew slipped into the chair and made sure everything was set. It had taken a lot of permission and signing tons of paperwork before he could get Holt to agree to this commercial, and he hoped Josh would forgive him for sharing the program with the world. Of course, once he saw the paycheck, he'd probably be dancing through the streets. Andrew nodded to Anna, their spokesperson, who began reading through the script, explaining how everything ran. Once she was done, the camera panned back to Andrew. He took a deep breath before speaking. As you can see, this point of sale exceeds the use of most points of sale in many ways. It allows you to see all sales no matter your location, all with the click of a button. Developed by Josh Stiles while he was still in college, its brilliant design came about when he saw a flaw in many of the marketing tools he used in his classes. Andrew turned toward the green screen, where several graphs appeared. When he approached me with the idea, we ran through many different ways of developing this tool, but it hit him in the middle of the night. The image of the computer screen showed up next. And the Styles marketing tool was born. It took a lot more work, but Josh's concept grew from a simple program he wrote in his college dorm room to a multi-million-dollar deal with Holt Electronics. And now, we're rolling it out to you. The software will be available beginning March 1st. Anna took over from there, and Andrew grabbed a bottle of water to help him calm his nerves. When she finished, Andrew yelled, "Cut," and it was a wrap. He needed to go through a few parts to smooth it out, but he hoped stations would run it and the electronics websites would pick it up to review and distribute. If all went well, it would go live in the next day or two. Normally it would have taken longer, but Holt had their top designers on the job. Deborah stood in the doorway. Well done in there, she said. I should have you shoot more commercials. You're a natural. I think I'll pass. I was so nervous, I'm surprised I didn't collapse mid-sentence. Andrew shrugged his coat on. What brought you here? I needed to make sure you got the message that your clothing ads have been approved and are on their way to the media outlets right now. When I heard what you were doing, I decided to come see it for myself. She paused. Did Josh really develop that whole thing? Andrew nodded. It's pretty amazing. I hate taking any credit when most of it was him. We knew he was good, but I didn't know he was this good. Do you think you two could tweak it enough to make it work for us? It would be nice to know which commercials are shown where and what the response is. He shrugged. I think that would be pretty easy once it rolls out to other corporations in March. We have to move a few things around, but we could have it done pretty quickly. If you and Josh could get it done before June, I see a promotion in your futures. She smiled and buttoned up her coat. See you back at the office. Andrew stared after her. What had just happened? Holt was faster than Andrew had expected. His commercial was back to him within 2 days after it had been recorded. He watched it several times, then did a silent victory dance at his desk. He loaded the ad onto a memory stick, then went to Josh's desk. Josh glanced up, but went back to work. Hey. Did you need something? Yeah, I need your okay on this before we pass it on. Andrew tossed the memory stick onto the desk next to Josh's arm. Let me know what you think. The trip back to his desk seemed to take an eternity. He forced himself to work so he could ignore the fact that just a few cubicles away, the world would either implode, or Josh would love it. The time lunch had come and gone. Josh still hadn't stopped by. Andrew finally stood and put on his coat. He was due at a shoot and couldn't wait any longer. The worry over the ad slowly turned to anger. He'd done everything he could, and even sweetened the deal. Not only was Josh going to get a huge bonus, but he'd also get a commission for every sale. And yet nothing. For all he knew, Josh had thrown away the memory stick as soon as Andrew went around the corner. Whatever. He had other things to worry about. Like the fact that his parents were arriving in a few days and his house still looked like a tornado had hit it. He'd finally called a contractor to finish the guest bedroom so he could concentrate on the kitchen. The shoot for a Valentine's Day commercial went long, but he was pleased with the actors he'd chosen. He made a mental note to use them again. Once he was sure that his client was happy with how it had gone, Andrew left the studio and headed straight for the hardware store. He needed to buy new faucets for the sink, and the other two stores he'd tried didn't have what he wanted, something that appeared antique, but wouldn't rust too quickly. He finally found the perfect bronze set that would accent the colors he'd picked for the walls. He then grabbed some knobs for the cupboards and handles for the drawers to match. The excitement of finishing up the kitchen that night made him hum softly to the radio, until he realized it was the same song Kayla had hummed at the Christmas party. The sense of loss he felt at that moment nearly overwhelmed him. He knew that no amount of burying himself in his work was going to wash that away. Chapter 11. Kayla finished tying the bow and set the gift under the Christmas tree. She'd finished the last of her shopping the day before while her sister Erica watched her kids, and she couldn't wait to see their faces when they saw the presents. A knock on the door sent a jolt through her. It was nearly midnight. She stood and went to the door, peeking through the hole. What in the world was Josh doing there that late? She opened the door and said, "Hey, what's going on? Is everything okay? Where's your computer?" He paced the floor, agitation emanating from him. "Why?" He sighed. "Just go get it. You need to see this." Kayla bit her lip. "Okay. I'll get it." She watched as he opened it and shoved a memory stick into the USB port. "Hey, careful. I just got this computer." Josh didn't answer as he clicked on the icon and opened up the program, then backed up so Kayla could see the screen. A girl spoke first, talking about a program that Kayla recognized. She was impressed that they had a commercial about the program, but she'd thought it was supposed to only be for Holt. The girl went through several examples before the screen zoomed over to Andrew, making Kayla gasp. "What is?" "Just listen," Josh interrupted. His face was blank as he stared at the screen. Kayla's eyes widened as the commercial continued on. Andrew made sure to say over and over that everything had been Josh's idea. When it was over, they both continued to stare at the screen. When Josh didn't say anything, she closed the lid. "What was that?" she asked hesitantly. "Andrew just signed a contract making this public. Without me." Anger flared until she saw the dazed expression on Josh's face. "I didn't know what was going on when I first watched it. Or after the second or third time, so I went to Holt Electronics to find out what was going on." Josh shook his head and met Kayla's eyes. "What it means is that I can pay off all my student loans and buy an apartment with the bonus. After that, I get a commission every time they sell licenses to this program to another corporation." Kayla opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. That was a lot of money. She stared down at the memory stick. "What did you say to Andrew?" "Nothing. I couldn't even speak to him after I watched the video, and by the time I got back from Holt, he was nowhere to be found." He rubbed his face and dropped onto the couch behind him. "I guess this is his way of apologizing." "I guess so, although I'm not sure he even needed to apologize. The more I've thought about it, the more I'm convinced those words couldn't have been from him. The only thing keeping me from running to him is embarrassment that I would ever even think that of him. Josh stood and pulled the memory stick out of the laptop. So, how do we apologize? Sending him cookies seems pretty lame, maybe I could buy him a bakery instead. I've been thinking about it, actually. That newspaper lady hit on something, and I think I'm going to use it. Josh leaned forward. What do you mean? She shook her head. I'm not going to tell you until I'm sure it's absolutely perfect. But Josh? Talk to him. Find out what's going on and make sure he's okay. It's killing me. He gave Kayla a quick hug. Will do. Just don't take too long to do whatever it is you're doing. I hate seeing you moping again. Josh left the house before Kayla could answer him. She watched his car as he pulled away. She put away the wrapping paper, scissors, and tape, then went back to her laptop. It was finally time to put her writing skills to the test. Kayla hit send on the last email and closed her laptop. She'd waited until morning to send it so she could read and reread what she'd written. Every word had to be perfect so the woman couldn't twist it. Not that she'd have much of a chance. Kayla had made sure it went to both the editor and owner of several different newspapers, hoping one of them would print it. Now all she could do was wait. Snow fell outside, leaving a blanket of white over the streets and grass. Ethan and Noah were at school, and Evie was down for a nap. The boys' school Christmas parties were starting soon, so she needed to make sure Evie was well rested or she would disrupt both of them. Once they were done with school, it would be time to pack so they could leave the next morning for her parents' house. She just hoped the snow would stop before then. She really didn't want to travel 3 hours in the snow. Mommy? Evie called from upstairs. Kayla checked the time and jumped out of her chair. More time had passed than she'd thought. Coming. Evie stood in the doorway, waiting to be let out. Kayla took down the gate and changed Evie, making sure to put on her warmest clothes over something she could wear in the classroom without getting too hot. They drove to the school and went to Noah's party first. Evie sat next to Kayla while she watched the kids play games and decorate sugar cookies. Santa came near the end, and each of the kids got to sit on his lap. Evie insisted on going up, but the second it was her turn, she screamed, and Kayla had to take her out into the hall to calm her down. Kayla took a moment to check her email on her phone to see if the document she needed had arrived. With taxes coming up, she had to make sure her licenses were all up to date. Her eyes widened when the messages started rolling in. Several of the papers had responded, letting her know they'd be publishing her letter over the next few days. Evie pulled on Kayla's shirt, bringing her out of her thoughts. Oh, sorry. Let's go. They went back into the room to help gather up Noah's things and then headed over to Ethan's party. Between pinning the nose on Rudolph and chasing Evie, Kayla was too busy to think about what could happen, but as soon as they were in the car, it hit her full force. Her letter was about to be published. And not just once, but in several papers. If only her grandma Sarah could see her now. Chapter 12. Andrew glanced back at his living room to make sure everything was in the right place, then opened the door to welcome his parents. Hey, how was your trip? He took his mom's coat while his dad brought in the luggage. It was long, but what can you expect over Christmas break? His mom hugged him before moving farther into the house. Wow, you did a wonderful job with your home. Did you hire it out or do it all on your own? Andrew grinned as he followed her. He was proud of what he'd done, but the praise from his mom made it that much better. I did this room and the kitchen. The bathrooms are next, but I figured I'd wait until after New Year's. You chose the colors and everything? His dad leaned closer to the paneling along the wall, no doubt checking to see how well Andrew had secured it. Yeah, I spent way too much time on those websites where you can do samples of different shades. Andrew led them into the kitchen. I'm hoping that this room will kinda take away the bachelor pad feeling people may get from the living room. His mom ran her hand along the granite countertop. It's beautiful. When you first bought this house, I have to admit, I was a little worried. I was a little worried too. Especially during the rainstorms when I had pots all over the floor. Once the roof was fixed, I worked on the rest when I could get to it. Anyway, let me show you to your room. He took their 2 bags and climbed the stairs to the first bedroom on the landing. Oh, Andrew, you did such a wonderful job in here. His mom moved around the room, studying the pictures that he'd hung on the walls. The bedspread was as close to the one his parents had at their house as possible. His dad gave him a side hug as he came in. You just made your mom's day. She hates being away from home. I remember. No matter where we moved, she had to have her quilt. Oh, you too. I'm not that bad. She yawned. Oh, dear. I guess I'm more tired than I thought. I'd wanted to stay up and talk, but I think it's time for bed. Then we'll see what we can do about making this house a little more festive. His dad laughed. Watch out. I think you just awakened the interior decorator in her. I figured it would happen at some point. Night, Mom. He kissed her cheek and hugged his dad before leaving their room. He checked the rooms downstairs before turning off the lights and heading to bed. He was pretty sure his mom had ordered the snow that had begun falling just after they arrived. She was that good at decorating for the holidays. Andrew rolled over and glanced at the clock. He panicked until he realized it was Saturday. He'd been so busy all week between work and finishing the house, he'd lost track of time. He threw on a pair of sweats, opened his door to get some coffee, and was met with the smell of blueberry pancakes wafting up the stairs. He walked into the kitchen to find his mom at the stove while his dad read the newspaper at the table. You realize it's just the 3 of us, right? Andrew pulled a few pancakes onto his plate and added butter. Or is there an army coming that I don't know about? I just wanted to make sure you have extras for after I leave. You can freeze what you don't use. Andrew poured hot maple syrup over his pancakes. I'm not going to argue with that. How is your business going, anyway? It's slow now that we're so close to Christmas, but it will pick up next week with people wanting to have their houses decorated for New Year's or Valentine's Day. Mom had started an interior decorating and party planning company the year before when she couldn't handle sitting still. She'd been a teacher for years before that. Now eat up. We'll go get a tree as soon as you're done. I was thinking of an artificial tree this year. I'd hate to get sap on my brand new floors. Andrew looked up from his plate when he realized the room had gone quiet. Both of his parents stared at him. What? Mom put her hands on her hips. We don't do artificial trees. Ever. We'll just make sure there are plenty of newspapers underneath it. Andrew held up his hands in surrender. Sorry. I forgot. After breakfast, Andrew climbed into the back of the SUV his parents had rented. They went to 3 different tree farms before they found a tree that would fit just right in his living room. His mother picked out 2 wreaths, and a trunk full of other decorations as well. Andrew kept offering to pay for everything, but his parents would just wave their hands and tell him they wanted to do it as a housewarming gift. When it was time to decorate, his mom insisted on working while his dad talked sports. They found the bowl games on TV, and Andrew watched his mom make his house look like a Christmas card as his dad yelled at the television. It was exactly how Christmas should be. He just wished he could share it with Kayla. Where was she right then? Had she decided to head up to Plymouth for Christmas? When he couldn't handle thinking about her anymore, he stood and stretched. I'm exhausted. Can I get you 2 anything before I head up? We'll be going to bed in just a few minutes. Mom finished straightening a bow on one of the wreaths. What do you think of the house? Did I go overboard? Yes, but I love it. Thank you. Mom beamed and finished cleaning up. Night, dear. Night, Mom. Andrew went up a few steps, then stopped. Do you still make that tart for Christmas Eve breakfast? Of course. Awesome. Good night. Andrew went to his room to go over the ads that were coming up in the next few days. Everything seemed to be in order. Still no email from Josh. Not that much could be done. The contract was signed, and Holt was already getting ready to roll out the software to other companies. Andrew shut his laptop and lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. It was nice having his parents there for Christmas, but he couldn't get over the fact that his best friend and the girl of his dreams were no longer in his life. The snow had fallen all night, ensuring they would have a white Christmas. Andrew walked downstairs, ready for the traditions his family had held on to since he was young. Christmas music played quietly on the old radio in the kitchen. His parents talked quietly at the table as they stared at the newspaper in front of them. His dad dropped the paper as Andrew walked into the kitchen to grab a mug. Andrew stopped. What's up? Mom and Dad glanced at each other before Mom stood to pull the tart out of the oven. Dad handed him the newspaper. We were just deciding what to do today. Why don't you read the news while we figure it out? Particularly the letters to the editor. Andrew shot him a look before taking the paper. One letter complained about the lack of recycling in their neighborhood, while another mentioned how ridiculous it was that people still parked on the street, even though it had been posted countless times that they needed to keep it clear for the snowplows. I give up. What am I looking for? Just keep reading. Dad took a sip of his coffee. Andrew sighed and glanced at the letters, but then stopped when he caught the word Thanksgiving in the middle of one of them. He dropped to a chair and spread the paper out in front of him. Dear editor, the holiday season always brings the nostalgia of Christmases past and also makes us wonder what could happen in the future. It's a time of giving, without a thought of what we'll receive. Back in 1827, my ancestor, Sarah Josepha Hale, began her quest to make things right with the world. She wanted to give women a magazine where they could be educated about the roles they play. But she didn't stop there. She wrote and edited several newspapers and articles for the betterment of society, and then she began the crusade that would take countless letters over a span of 20 years to fulfill. She wrote to the presidents of the United States faithfully, trying to convince them that Thanksgiving was important to celebrate so we could give thanks for those who came before us. My family has celebrated her accomplishments for as long as I can remember, and sadly, that celebration came under the spotlight recently, and not for positive reasons. A reporter for the Times felt the need to twist and turn an innocent man's answers into a jumble of outright lies where it insulted those closest to him, along with those who are very dear to me. She threw her journalistic integrity out the window, and while she was protected by the newspaper, we were the ones who had to bear the brunt of her lies. The sad thing is, we didn't trust him. We chose to believe the lies instead of realizing that, like my ancestor before, all he ever wanted was the best for those around him. Since then, we've learned that he went out of his way to make life for his business partner, my brother, into something so much more than he could have ever imagined. No one asked him to do so. It was done out of kindness and as a way to make amends for someone else's actions. That I want to offer a sincere apology to my dear friend and pray that he can forgive me. We have a lot to talk about, but I want him to know that I'll do what my ancestor would have done and see the very best in him. Signed, Kayla Stiles. Andrew stared at the words, trying to figure out what he was supposed to do or say. She'd pushed herself past the demons that had kept her from writing, and done a great job. From the look of it, Josh had liked the commercial and gone to Kayla. Hey, Mom? Dad? We know. You go. We'll hold down the fort until you get back. His mom's eyes were filled with tears as she smiled at him. He looked at her in surprise. As far as I know, she's in Plymouth right now. That's a good 3 to 4 hour drive from here. Well, you'd better get going. I'll pack you some food. His mom must have seen the shock on his face because she patted him on the back. Listen, you don't let her write something like that for the entire country to see without going to find her. I just ask that you bring her over to meet us when you get the chance. Andrew took 2 stairs at a time to change and grab a few things. He ran back down while buttoning his shirt. Are you sure you two don't want to come? I would feel horrible leaving you here for Christmas. I thought you'd never ask. His mom threw Dad's coat to him and picked up her suitcases. Get in the car. They were on the road within minutes, heading for the interstate. His dad drove while Andrew sat in the back, trying to figure out what in the world he was going to say to Kayla. He'd already apologized several times, and from the letter, it sounded like she'd finally forgiven him. He could rehearse what he wanted to say all the way to Plymouth, but in the end, he would have to see how she responded to seeing him. Andrew was surprised when he looked up to see the Welcome to Plymouth sign as they drove past it. The weather was bad during parts of the drive, but even then, he was pretty sure they made it in record time. He stared at the home where all of this had started just a month before. You two stay here. I'll wave when it's safe to come in, okay? We're going to go find a hotel. Text when you're ready for us, his dad said. His mom turned to look at him. Good luck. Thanks. I'll need it. Andrew climbed out of the car and took a deep breath. Since his parents were getting a hotel, he decided to leave his bag in the car and not assume that he could stay there with a family that might hate him, even if Kayla seemed to have forgiven him. Andrew walked up the steps to the house and paused before knocking on the door. He glanced behind him, but his parents had left already. He knocked and waited, the door opened, and Charlotte stood there. Her eyes widened, and she left the entryway to call, Kayla. It was a few minutes longer before Kayla came to the door. I read the most interesting letter to the editor this morning. Andrew drew nearer to her. I had to come and compliment the writer personally. Kayla threw her arms around his neck. I'm so sorry. Tears streamed down her cheeks. For what? It was my article that made such a mess. He hugged her tightly to him, thrilled to have her in his arms again. Does your family hate me? She laughed and pulled back. After what you did for Josh. They've been driving me crazy trying to get me to call you. They were incredibly upset at first, but my dad, tracked down the reporter and grilled her until she admitted that she'd been upset by your answers and made up her own. Something you said about coming to our house for Thanksgiving made her dig deeper, and apparently, she found a few of my old articles about Sarah. Kayla shook her head. Talk about desperation. Anyway, she's already turned in her resignation, and the newspaper is printing an apology tomorrow. That's fantastic. Andrew caressed her cheek, so amazed that she was back in his life. He kissed her lightly, enjoying the feel of her lips on his. All the hurt, all the anger washed away as he held her in his arms. It had only been a few short weeks since the first time he'd met her, but he knew that his life wasn't complete without her in it. He stepped back, ending the kiss. He pulled out a small box and held it out. I know this isn't the best time with us just getting back together, but I don't want to wait any longer. Kayla, would you marry me? Kayla gasped and stared down at the diamond ring. Her hand shook as she nodded. Yes. Of course. Yes. Andrew slipped the ring on and pulled her into a hug, laughing as he heard cheers coming from the other side of the door. While the proposal hadn't been as private as he'd hoped, this fit just perfectly. He'd given all he had to be with her, and he was grateful that he'd received her love in return. Epilogue. 1 year later. Kayla shut the trunk and climbed in the passenger side, ready to head to Plymouth for Thanksgiving. Andrew started the car, then leaned over to kiss her to the chorus of groans from the back seat. I think we're ready. She took Andrew's hand in hers. Mom said the turkey already smells fantastic. Hopefully she'll wait to serve dinner until we get there. As long as we don't miss the walk on the beach after dinner. I hear there's a great story your family likes to tell about Thanksgiving. Kayla laughed as they drove away from her house, thinking of what she could write in her latest piece. She'd been hired on at the Times, taking over the other woman's spot at the paper. It was only fitting, although it took a large salary and really good benefits before they finally got her to agree to take the job. Ginger barked in the back of the car, sending the children into giggles. Kayla glanced back at them and winked. Make sure my wedding dress doesn't get wrinkled. Kayla grinned down at the ring on her hand. We know, Mom. Ethan shook his head. They'd already been told many times before. Both families had suggested a spring wedding, but both Andrew and Kayla knew that the best way to start their new life together was to begin on the day they met. Black Friday wouldn't happen for them that year, but Kayla was perfectly happy with that. After all, Thanksgiving wasn't about shopping. It was about family.
This has been Love in Return by Jacqueline Hardy. I hope you have enjoyed the story. Make sure to check her other audiobooks. You can also check out her stories at www.jacquelineweistbooks.com.